That's important. All right. So based on our conversation as we wrapped up last class, we've decided to do the first class doing Excel and pivot tables. And we're going to have a few really cool exercises for you tonight that I think you'll really enjoy and start seeing some of the benefits of using Excel, pivot tables, and slicers and pivot charts as a form of visualizing data, right? And this is the same type of data sets that we've been working with throughout all of our classes. And then classes 2, 3, and 4 will be working with Tableau, and it's Tableau Public. So I will be sharing the link to that. Actually, I'm going to open up class 2 on OpenHub and the links there. And I may be adding some additional data files, but I'll just remind you to download those before the second class, okay? So this Monday, right, I was planning on holding office hours, but I'm cognizant that some folks will be taking the holiday off. So if you can make it, fine. If not, that's okay too. Usually the install for Tableau Public is not an issue, but I'll record the office hour, and even if nobody makes it, I'll record it, where to get it, and so on and so forth, so that you have it. All right. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah. For Tableau, are we going to also be using RStudio?
No. No. So RStudio and Tableau are two different products, two different companies. Does that make sense?
So we won't be using RStudio for any of the lessons this course?
That's correct. That's correct. We pulled
so
that
maybe
out.
I could switch back to the other computer.
Yeah, that's correct. Now, that being said, Tableau is visual, it's graphical. So, you do want to be on a node that can handle that, but it's not uber intensive. Okay. So you just want to be on something that visually you can see well, because it's a very visual exercise, right? You're making the GUI as, insightful as possible. So you're spending a lot of time squinting and making sure everything is aligned properly and stuff like that. So yeah, so we won't be using RStudio. So you do what you feel is best there, Jack. Okay. The goal is, Tableau does take some room to install, so that you want to, factor that into your decision. So I'm flexible. You can go either way. You might decide to install it on 2 nodes. And that's something you can try. And if you want suggestions, what have you. All right.
How much space does it take?
You know what? Let me pull it up, because I don't remember. And so let me just do a peek here. Let's see, Tableau. And this is public, so it's not the full Megillah, but it is the free version. Let me see here. How much disk? Let's see here. Tableau. This is one of the softwares that I highly, highly recommend that you become very familiar with.
Question.
Yes.
Can we stage everything, our weekly stuff into OneDrive path, as opposed to when we were in RStudios, we had to make sure we were on a local drive?
I have not heard of any issues. By the way, it's a 15 gig install, so it's not that bad. I have not heard any issues about, where you store your Tableau files. We are going to be working with worksheets. And so because there's multiple tabs in any given document, as you add to that, the size of the files increase, but I have not heard any issues with OneDrive. I will say that as a whole, it's better to not work off of a drive that's syncing. However, I know people do it. I do it myself. So what I would say is just start out that way with the prep, a plan that, should that not work well for you, have a plan B, as always. Okay. Like right now, I'm throwing everything in Dropbox and it's syncing and there's no issues. But that's not to say that one day Dropbox doesn't have an issue, right? So, and I always have a plan B. So, but I have plenty of disks, so I could point it in another direction. Andrew, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I'm downloading Tableau right now.
Awesome. Awesome.
We're getting the
right.
public version, right?
Yep. Yeah, the public version. You got it. Yeah, unfortunately, I wish I could give you guys like the university edition. There's an academic edition, which is a little more robust. And then there's the full blown enterprise edition, which of course you have all the bells and whistles, but that's money, right? Costs money. So everything we do, we're going to work off the free version. With the
Just out
understanding,
of curiosity, what does the enterprise version cost and how many licenses do you get with it?
you know what, Jer? I have not looked at enterprise only because,
Because you
You
get
know-
academic.
right, because for the most part, any courses I've written around Tableau have been academic, so I've been kind of lucky. But you know what? This is an important. Let me just check it out.
I'm just curious.
Yep. Yep. Let's see here. All right, we've got desktop. Let's see here. So there's a server version. There's a public version of, obviously we just talked about that. There's a server version and desktop. I'm going to look at the server version because typically enterprise you would go that route. And let's see, they give you a free trial, and I'm not seeing any pricing.
Mhm.
This almost looks like custom quote or something.
Yeah.
You get, you can actually, it's a VM copy. Let's just see here.
So we'd be using the free trial for 30 days.
No, public, there is no free trial for 30 days. Public is free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, public is
Just going
free.
through the site, so I'm just trying to see where it is.
Yeah, here's the plans and pricing. I need new glasses or something. Oy, oy. All right, for teams and organizations, Jerry, you ready about this?
Mhm.
All right, so everything that they have here is not, okay, Tableau Enterprise. Okay, it's $70. All right, for Tableau Creator, it's $70 a month per user.
Per user, okay.
Billed annually. However, it looks to me like, and what you get is one creator license of Tableau server. And I think what they would probably do is a custom quote if you had like 5 or more licenses kind of deal. But even for 5 or under,
It's yeah, it's
it's
about
not
$800,
bad,
$900.
right? It's not bad. If you have an enterprise of a lot of individuals, right, then you're looking at more money.
Right.
But so the top per user price is 70. That's for creator, and it's user, per user per month, billed annually. And again, that has a server. Each one of these has a server product. There's also data management add-in. It's $5. Einstein Discovery allows you to do predictive modeling, and that's $25 a month per user. So it adds up when you start aggregating all those things, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it adds up. They get you. They get you. All right. So first thing I want to do, I'm just going to talk a little bit about pivot tables, and I'm just going to share just some information on a whiteboard, which, just rather than do like a PowerPoint or something along those lines, but it's just some best practices for pivot tables. So let me just plop this on the screen, and we can just quickly chat about it. So, and I hope blue works for you. I had to do something other than black. Is everyone able to read
Looks
that?
good, yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So, so basically, pivot tables are designed to take detailed data and summarize it, aggregate it, right? And so that you can analyze patterns and trends. I mean, I think that goes without saying. In R and in Python, we were doing that like tons and tons of times, right? And looking at different trends and what have you. So pivot tables in and of themselves work with tabular data, very similar to what you've been working with in class, data sets that have even, columns and rows, preferably with headers at the top, because you need to be able to identify what each heading is, right? And then they should be descriptive. So your first row should definitely be, labeled in a way that you would know what it is. You don't want, column A, column B, and those kinds of things. It's kind of ambiguous. Every column should have unique category of data. So a lot of these principles, by the way, are normalization principles. So for example, if you've got unit price and you've got quantity, those are two distinct categories of information, right? You don't want to meld them together and things of that nature. You want them to be unique and distinct and single units of information. So of course, being tidy with your data is very important. Every row should describe an individual item or observation, right? So you don't want to have grouping levels in your data because it's no longer tabular, right? If it's a flat data set, that's perfect. Just like when you're analyzing data in Python and or R, same thing. So every row should represent an individual item and or observation, and the column name should not include data values. So for example, if you had a column called state, right, you would assume that anything in that column would be states, like, New Jersey, New York, what have you. But if you accidentally have, let's say in the state column heading, you replace that with a data value like New York, that's going to be a problem. That's going to skew everything. All right. So basically the pivot table function in Excel is looking at the headers to organize things categorically. All right. So none of your column names should have data items that are in there. And especially if you plan on doing any queries, filters, or what have you, your column header should be descriptive, because when you go to build it, you want to know what you're building. So very, very important. So that's the first part. Second part is this, and you guys are going to love this because we will talk about Unicode.
Got it already.
So actually, let me reuse this table here, if it'll let me. Of course it won't. Lord have mercy. Select it, kill it. Okay, there we go. Yeah, no Unicode allowed. Okay. So important things to know before creating a table: no empty rows or columns, right? Everything should be single row, like the heading should be single row. You don't want to have multiple rows for the heading. And you want to make sure that everything is tabular. Make sure that you don't have any groupings, and don't repeat groups as columns. So don't have, product 1, product 2, product 3 in columns, because that is not going to work. No blank cells. And this is where it gets kind of hairy. You don't want to have gaps. So blank cells between columns. Let's say you have a dead column between column A and B, right? And it's kind of just blank. That's going to skew things, because hopping over that column, when you're including your data range, you know what's going to happen. We worked in Excel and we had a data range. We had to make sure there was no gaps. Same thing follows here. Empty cells, not good. Now, as we know, we're going to have empty cells. So the question becomes, do we fill it with zeros? Right? That's so think of the implications. If you've got zeros and you're looking to aggregate sales, for example, that's going to do what to your data if you have zeros in there? Underreported revenue, right? So and why you would have zeros for an order, let's just say, would also beg the question, who gets stuff for free? Just a logical question, right? So if there is a lot of garbage in the data, or the data needs to be cleaned, you want to do that before you go into the pivot table process, because you're relying on that aggregation to give you real patterns. And if there's garbage in the data, that garbage may either prevent you from creating the pivot table and or skew your results, which will then not give the insight, provide the insight that you're looking for. So be tempted not to delete anything when there isn't data, because that's creating another problem. So for example, let's say for whatever reason you got, let's say you did a data extraction from Oracle, the Oracle database in an organization. They said, here's the data, have fun, and somehow, some way the data came through with zeros. And let's say there's, a couple 100,000 records. You probably will want to see, are there any blanks? Just like we did in Excel, just like we did in Python, just like we did in R, because those zeros will hurt you. Those zeros are going to skew the results. So let me ask you a question. Let's say you get that extraction, and it could be from a client or your boss. You see a bunch of zeros. What do you do? How would you handle it? What would be the best way to handle it, maybe?
Well, either you impute it, or you, depending on how many there are, you would either impute it or delete them.
Right. And it's also going to depend on the nature of it, whether you impute. All right.
Mhm.
So for example, let's say you're looking to get real revenue, right? What are the implications of imputing, let's say, sales values? is it real money? That's the question. Why are they
Yeah.
zeros? And is this actually sales that occurred? You know, that would be a really valid question. And so it warrants going back to where you got the data, the source, and saying, we've got a problem here, right? Because, you know, you're expecting me to render this report, create a dashboard with this data. And if there's gaps and or problems, I don't want to just impute unless it is a safe bet to do so. So can we think of any cases where it would be okay to impute, let's say, a sales value with the average? And I can think of a few, but it's, again, it's a hypothetical scenario in my brain that, you know, it's so unusual, but so let's say, I'll just throw one at you because I know you guys are probably tired but this is one that I have seen before. So a particular customer's data comes through without data in it. And you know that basically either, let's say, you know, the average order value that customer places on average, and you can get that value, right? You could impute it with an average. You could also impute it with an average from customers like that customer. But again, both of those make the hair stand up on my neck because it's not a safe, right? But you know, if let's say you did that, you would then need to qualify the results by saying that this was imputed. And, you know, we need to understand that that's the nature of what we did. And it may inflate certain values, maybe in the region or in the state or for the month or what have you. Okay, so you have to really, really think about it. Now, the other thing you want to do is not click like I just did. You want to apply formatting, type formatting to fields. So format them as numbers if they are indeed numbers and you plan on calculating. Use currency if it's representing money. Format dates as dates, because when you create that pivot table, it will perceive those formats, right? So that's just another thing. You can save yourself a lot of time and headache in doing that. All right, the last thing, let me just select this and think. The last thing very quickly is here's a summary, and you might have seen something similar to this. Again, make sure that, again, the principles of tabular design, a flat data set, right? The first row is the headers, the labels. Every column represents a unique category. Every row represents individual items or observations, right? So think my customers, think my products, right? None of the column names have, you know, can double as data related items. So a column should not have things like the month, January, February, March. That value should be in the cell, not at the column header level. All right. And then, of course, keep in mind that a pivot table has 4 core areas we're going to learn about tonight: values, rows, columns, and filters. So you can almost see the intersection, rows and columns, the values in the cells, right? The intersection. Think of a cross tabulation, and then the ability to query and or filter that data, right? Very, very important. All right, questions on that? Yes, no, maybe? All right, are we ready to rock and roll? All right, we're going to open up the tabular data Excel file. All right, and I am going to share my screen. And so let me know when you have it open. I don't want to go too fast for you.
It's open.
I mean, it's such a huge data set. I'm scared.
Are we opening this in Excel or Tableau?
In Excel. We're doing Excel tonight, week 1, and then weeks 2, 3, and 4, we're doing Tableau. Yep.
I don't have Excel on this computer.
All right, that will be a problem. Yeah. So in the class description at the top, I say required software is Excel.
I got the new computer, remember? My
Yes.
computer went about halfway through the class.
Yes. I'm just trying to think if there's a trial edition that you could download.
I'll find something.
Let me see here. Trial edition of Excel, because it's got to be 2016 or 365. All right, let's see here. Are you a student at all, Andrew?
No, unfortunately not.
Oh, all right. There's a free trial for Microsoft 365. Let me see if this, I don't know if you're comfortable doing this or not, but I'll put this in the chat. There's that. Let me see if there's just Excel, because that might be a larger data download. Yeah, they give it to you as 365. Let's see here. What's this? Ooh, what's? Yeah, see, I'm not going to a third party like that. No, no, no. There's all kinds of clone sites out there that try and get you. So I don't download it except from Microsoft. So I would be very careful there. There's a lot of clones and stuff. So do you think that link will take you too long to download it, Andrew? Or are you comfortable with doing a trial?
I'm gonna look around for it.
Okay, so I put it in the chat. Yeah. All right. So if you want to, try downloading that. I don't know how long it's going to take you, but I don't know if we can hold up the class to get it downloaded. Oh, you know what, Andrew? Hold on. I found just Excel. Let me share this because that'll be shorter and sweeter, and you can try for free. All right, you see that there in For Home?
You guys continue. I'll figure it out.
Okay, yeah, do the second link. If you do it at all, do the second link because that's just Excel. All right, and I'm sure you'll get caught up as we go. All right, so we have some tabular data. It's not a lot of data, right? So what are just some observations here? What do we have as far as unique rows? What's described here? Like if you were to say, this appears to be X, what would you say?
Appears to be data from store sales,
Okay. All right, because we've got revenue, right?
right?
Okay. And it appears that we have,
Different stores and different model
Region.
numbers. I don't know what the model numbers refer to, maybe different products.
okay, so each of these models represent a product, yes. So and so you've got this model and you've got three distinct models here. So it almost looks like a subset of data, right? We have revenue associated with it, we have the month, we have the region, and we have the market, but it's not a lot of data. It almost looks like an aggregation. Would you say that it looks like an aggregation it to some extent?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing that you would want to say is, where did this data come from? And is this all there is? That would be one of the first questions I would ask. Since it only goes through January, February, March, and April, it appears to be,
Well, we have May.
and May, sorry, yes, right? So but it's definitely not the full year. So it looks to me like a subset of data. So what's really important is knowing what you have in front of you, and that will then clue you in as to what you can do with it. All right, which is something that's super important. All right, let me move this out of the way here. This is like annoying. Yeah, okay, go over here. All right, so that's the first thing. So now what we're going to do is we're going to see what possibilities we have, because we know it's not complete data. It appears to not be complete data, but we're going to see what kind of pivot tables the software is going to suggest to us are possible. So what you want to do is just click anywhere in any of the cells. All right, and we're going to go up to and again, what I would not do is click up in the headers, just because of the nature of how that works. We're going to click on insert, and we're going to go to recommended pivot tables. Okay. So if you're not sure what to do with some data, you could always try this and, say, okay, what does it think it can do? So here we've got count of revenue by model. We've got sum of revenue by model. We've got count of revenue by month. Let me just make this a little bigger. We've got sum of store by model, sum of revenue by month. You see, we've got a bunch of different
Store.
options here. All right, does everyone see that?
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right,
How
so
do you close that screen?
that's which screen? Which screen?
Okay,
Which screen?
recommended pivot tables, because it was half on one, the cancel was on another monitor, and I didn't see where to
Oh, okay.
where to
Okay.
where to say okay or cancel. So I'm saying what's going
Oh,
on.
okay. Okay. All right. So basically, each one of these, which out of all of these, which one do you think would be most beneficial? If you were to make a recommendation, which one do you think would be most beneficial?
Well, I would want to be wanting to look at average.
Okay, you
might
think
tell us-
average?
Yeah,
Okay.
that might tell us what's going on, you know, at each individual region or each individual store.
Okay. All right. So average you think would be well. What about revenue, total revenue per model? This little guy right here. And you can see the
We want to
preview.
know which products are bringing the most revenue. Yeah.
Okay. And are you guys able to see my recommended pivot tables
Mhm.
window here? Okay. Count of revenue. That's not very helpful, right?
What would the
Right.
count of revenue be? Just
Well, what do you think it's doing? So that's a great question. What do you think it's doing? How is it, what is it counting? It's counting the revenue values,
so it's how many values we have for revenue. It's
right?
nothing.
And what it's doing is the row labels are basically breaking it out by month,
Mhm.
right? So anytime you have by month and market, what they've done here is basically these, if you took a kind of a box here, everything, your line items are, you know, your month, your region or your, you know, market area. And it's the number of items, revenue items found for, let's say, January, February, March, April, May. So there apparently was 3 sales total in January. And New England had more than Great Lakes, right? February, same thing. And it's pretty consistent across the board until we get to May. That in May, we only had 1 and 1. So do you think this is informative at all, this particular one?
I mean, from my point of view, I don't think there's any one single answer. It really is going to depend on what angle you're trying to look at it.
Right, exactly. So here's the thing. All of these are different variations based on possibilities, right? It's recommended. It is a possibility. So for example, if your client was looking at, we need to have at minimum, you know, with all our markets, we need to have at least 10 orders, you know, 10 revenue generating orders in let's say January. Well, we have not accomplished that. Clearly, we have a grand total of 3, right? And then the second question might be, well, which ones did produce and what did they produce? Well, England got 2, Great Lakes got 1, right? So it opens up a conversation. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is it looks kind of scant as a pivot table. It may not look very powerful as a pivot table, but it is very important when you start thinking about, well, how many orders am I seeing for January, February, March? If they had a particular goal or KPI in mind, like Jack says, you know, well, it depends on what your goal, what you're looking at, then this would tell you. If let's say the overall goal for, let's say, January through May was to have, let's say, 30 orders come in, we definitely did not make that. We have only 14 total, right? And we see that New England did almost double that Great Lakes did. So this then would lead you into a decision-making process. What do we need to drill down further, right? We need to look at things further. So does that make sense? When we're looking at each one of these, we want to ask ourselves, what does this tell us, right? How about this one right here? This one I kind of like, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this particular one. What does it tell you? I guess is the question.
It's just some of the stores.
Yeah. So it's sum of store by month and market. So here's a good question. In the Great Lakes column,
Yeah, all the
right, in the
stores are
Great Lakes,
same.
does this tell us anything? In the
There's
Great
only
Lakes,
there's only one store number in Great Lakes. Is that all one store?
that is all one store. Yeah. So the fact that it brought this in, it doesn't add a lot of value, and the aggregate value, the grand total,
It's
doesn't do
meaningless.
much.
Yeah,
Right. It's meaningless. Right. The same thing for New England. Now in New England, we actually have two separate values, right? So when we look at our data table, what is going on here? We've got a 27 and there's no such store, right? So what's going on there? It added them together. These are store numbers,
Right.
right? So this particular one, we do have a grand total, but what is the grand total a function of? The store numbers.
Store numbers. This chart's not telling us anything.
Exactly. So this is one that we could definitely say, no, we don't, this recommendation, what it did is it says, hey, let's aggregate some numbers. This is meaningless. So you definitely would not utilize something like this, right? Without a doubt. Let's look at one more. So how about this one? What does this tell us? This is back to your averages, Jerry. You were
Mhm.
saying I'd be interested in averages. What is
Average of revenue by model.
Okay.
So
And so we've got which models here?
only 3 models.
Right. Okay. So which model is the highest producer?
2500P.
Yep. Okay. And that's in New England. All right. And which model is like superbly low relative to the others?
That's 30300.
Yep. So this is super small, but this gives us some really good information, right? This gives us, helpful information. All right, let's look at just one more. How about this guy here? And let me make it. How about the average of revenue by store and month? Do you find this one to be useful?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
And
why is it going to like, what, 5, 6 decimal places?
because it's a representation, obviously, if you were to implement it, you would just clean it up.
Right.
It's a representation, right? So you don't get formatting precision in like the revenue or the recommended pivot table preview,
Okay.
right? You could clean that up. So forgetting that part of it, what insight do you derive just looking at this? Again, it's a superbly simple pivot table, but it is very meaningful. So what does it tell you?
That March and May, oh no, wait a minute, because of the decimals.
Yeah, the data's kind of left,
Yeah.
right kind of deal.
Yeah, April looks like it was the slowest month.
Okay.
It's slower than February, which has 28 days. I mean,
Okay. All right. What else?
why is January good? I mean, geez,
Exactly.
nobody buys anything
Nobody.
in January.
So that's an unusual thing. January, historically, it's after the holidays. It's the beginning of the year. You don't usually hit the ground running in January. So I would be curious to find out what's going on. Now, a particular store did that.
Maybe
and
they're
that's
ski shops.
okay. So that may be it, right? So it's one particular store did very well relative to the others in January, which is traditionally not a very high producing month.
And
So-
that's that store is in the Great Lakes.
Yep.
I said, no, it's in New England.
It's New England. Yes, sorry. Yep, you're right. So that's an unusual. So this is actually an outlier relative to the other two.
Mhm.
I would say this is an outlier relative to these as well. So is this, right? So we have actually, when we look at our data, 210, 50, 15, which is a particular store in New England, is doing superbly well relative to the other stores. So if you're a manager, or let's say you're you're informing your client about this. How would you verbalize it to your client? In simplistic terms.
No, that store you got over in New England, it's, you know, and we know the location of it, I think it's doing real well
Mhm.
compared to, you know, all your other stores. Let's look what they're doing.
Right.
It's
Okay.
working there.
Or you could
Okay.
say this uh, this regional store in this region of the stores in this region of New England have um, uniquely higher sales revenue than any of the other stores in any other region.
But
Right,
that
and
other
it's
store in the region is doing really badly.
right. Really poor. This
Nothing
one.
in May. What, did they closed in May?
Exactly, exactly. So here we have a store that's superbly struggling. Here we have one that's consistently stable over time, relative, right? So, but
I'm telling you, if this were, because I have some experience in the ski industry,
Mhm,
if this were a ski industry thing,
mhm.
analysis, I'd say that the top one, you know, the 5015 is probably a ski shop that would be close to or in a ski area, whereas the other one might be in a mall somewhere.
Okay, all right. So at
You
this
know, but
point,
I'd want to know. I'd want to know where the stores are and what they're selling. And
exactly. And at some point, given that you do have a superbly low data value trending over a period of months and then nothing in May, it starts that conversation of, do we need to close the store? You know,
these
and
dollars are these thousands of dollars. Do we know?
well, let's think about it. Revenue wise, if you see the data over there, right?
Yeah.
Revenue is basically in thousands.
In thousands.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you're not going to close a store that's doing $375,000.
Right. Exactly. However, that would be something you would want to verify with your right with your client, because remember, this was a data extraction that came from their ERP software, and the way it came over, it may have been skewed left or right. We don't know. So those are always valid questions to ask. All right, excellent, excellent. All right, so what we're going to do is we're not going to accept any of these. You know, we've had a good conversation about them. I'm going to show you how to build one that is very simple. Okay, so to build a pivot table, you're simply going to click somewhere in your table. Again, I like to stay away from the header row only because I want to pick up data values, right? And I don't want to get it confused. And I'm going to click on the pivot table button up top here. If you're not on the insert menu, just click insert pivot table. All right. Now, before you, click OK or do any additional things here, you do want to make sure that it picked up your data. So you can see that the range that it's referenced is correct. And we're actually going to be building a dashboard. So we always want to make sure it got everything. So I can see that it got everything from A1 to F15. And what I'm going to do is actually allow it to create a new worksheet this time. When we start adding additional ones, we won't do that. But for now, what we're going to do is just click OK. All right. And I've got to move this out of my way so I can let you see the pivot table fields. All right. So what we get is a new sheet tab. Now, our sheet tab allows us to plan out our pivot table. What's kind of nice is, and you guys got this same thing here. There was no errors, no issues.
Right.
All right. On the right-hand side, we have a list of fields that we can work with. And we have the 4 areas that I was talking about earlier. We've got filters, we've got columns, we've got rows, and we've got values. So what we want to do first is we're going to drag month down to rows. Okay. You're just dragging it with your mouse kind of and plopping it, a technical term. So now what we've done is we say, put the months that it perceives in the rows location. So these are our labels for our rows. All right. The next thing we're going to do is take revenue and put it in the values section. Okay. Now, so we have sum of revenue by month is in essence what we have here. Easy, right? Not difficult. But you'll notice that it did not bring in any dollar signs or currency. So I'm going to show you a quick way to fix that. You might be tempted to do it in the pivot table itself. There's a better way to do it. we're going to click on the little drop down arrow next to sum of revenue on the right hand side in the pivot table area. Does everyone see that?
No, sum of revenue on the right.
Yes.
In the pivot table field side, right?
Pivot table,
You see it there, Jerry?
field side, no, I just, more tables.
Pivot
I
table
wasn't successful in dragging it over. So.
and
walk me
dragging
through
which
that.
over?
Anything, you click on month. Okay,
Okay.
now it worked. Okay. But it's showing up on row 3, which is where yours is showing up. Okay. So
Okay.
I clicked on month and it worked and it didn't before. Then I click on revenue.
And you put revenue in the values section.
Yeah, I see the sum of revenue. I see the values. I see what you have. Okay.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is click on the little drop down arrow next to sum of revenue. You see that?
No, where's sum of revenue?
And on my screen,
There's month, sum of revenue. Got it. Okay, down at the bottom.
okay, you do see it.
Yeah, I got it.
Click on value field settings,
Mhm.
click on number format, and we're going to choose currency. And click OK.
Where's the value field settings?
Value field settings. If you click on the drop down arrow
Okay,
next to sum of revenue and do value field settings,
got it.
and then number format, and then we're just choosing currency. And I like to choose, $2 sign or two decimal places. If you don't feel it's relevant, you could, get rid of those. But for now, we'll just leave it at 2 decimal places. All right. And
Where's
then
currency, where's currency?
and then click OK.
Where number format. Okay.
Okay.
Currency
Click on number format.
and 2 decimal places.
Right. So you got it?
Yep.
All right. Awesome. Okay. So now we have our table looking nice, right? It's not very big, but hey, why not? So what we want to do is we're going to change the sum of revenue label here. We're going to call it total revenue. Okay. So we're just going to type and replace it. And in the row labels cell, we're going to call it month. All right. So we've got month, we've got total revenue, grand total, everything makes sense. Hopefully.
Got it to work, yeah. Okay.
All right. So now we're going to rename our sheet tab down below where it says sheet 1. We're going to double click on that and we're going to call this sales revenue. Oops. Don't grow your nails like I just did. Saki. Yeah. Sales revenue. My goodness. Revenue. Get it together. Come on. All right. So sales revenue. Easy peasy, right? Now, you also probably realize that in order to get back to your pivot table properties, you have to click somewhere in the pivot table. And as soon as you do that, your pivot table fields open up. And of course, you can make changes and do what have you. The other thing you could do with this table right now is you can click on the little drop down arrow.
If we wanted to throw store in there.
We're not going to do that yet, Jerry.
Okay.
Okay. I have this whole tonight scripted and
Okay.
and,
No,
yeah.
we'll kick it. one
Yeah,
step at a
we can
time.
play later. Okay.
Yep.
So let's say I wanted to just see January and February. I could deselect May, March, April, May, and I can limit the amount of data that I have on my screen. Right. But you'll notice that it is a manual process, right? It's
Now,
not
how
that
did you deselect there by
friendly.
clicking in the pivot table?
I clicked on the arrow next to month in the pivot
Month.
table.
And you took, I got it, to get
Yep.
May,
And you
April,
just
March.
decheck or deselect the ones that you don't want.
Okay.
All right. Again, it's kind of a 2-step process, not that very friendly. It's okay. I could also sort differently. So I could sort in ascending, not very snazzy, but it's okay. Notice that when I sort it in ascending fashion, right, it does it by month. And that's because it's perceiving it as a date. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? So even though we did not label this as a date, okay, you see that there? It is perceiving it as a date, which is a good thing. All right.
Now it knows to pull in the data from the tabular data tab.
Say that again?
It knows that it's looking at the tabular data tab for,
Yes,
for
it
the
is
information.
linked. Yes,
It's
it is
linked.
linked. So remember, when we built the table, when we built the pivot table, we had to specify a range. So it's locked to that
Right,
range.
block to that range.
Okay. Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jerry, because very important. Let's say I change data values here. I'm not going to do that, but let's pretend we did change the revenue or something. It will not automatically update. Very important. So if you know that your data in the linked tabular data, or I call it tabular data, it's the best way, but this table that it's using for its data, if you know that a value changed, what you have to do is right click on your pivot table and choose refresh.
Right.
All right. So it doesn't automatically do that. If you're familiar with, obviously, linking cells and updating data in Excel and formulas and all that, it updates automatically.
Mhm.
This is one of those scenarios where it doesn't update automatically. So you would want to, just manually update it.
That sucks.
Yeah, it does. It does kind of suck, but that's one of the limitations of a pivot table,
Mhm.
right? So every tool is going to have pros and cons. This is just one of them. What can I say? All right. So what we want to do now is we are going to click. What's that?
I just did something.
Okay. What did you do?
I clicked on hide the menu we were working with on the right-hand side. I don't know how I did that.
Okay. So
I'll
when
get it back.
I didn't hear what you said.
I wonder how I get it back.
Okay. Did you click in the pivot table?
Clicking in the pivot table, right
And-
click, show field list. Okay, got it.
Okay. All right. So yeah, if you do turn it off and you click in your pivot table and it does not show, you can ask for the field list to come back. Good.
Right
All right.
clicking. By right
Yep.
clicking.
That's right. So where did you right click, Jer?
In the pivot table.
You got it, right? So, and that does happen sometimes. You sometimes accidentally hide it. I had a scenario a couple weeks ago where I don't know what I clicked on. It just disappeared. And so it happens. Sometimes we don't know why. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put we're building basically a dashboard. And then we're going to talk about, does this dashboard inform us or not? I'm going to kind of keep a spoiler alert out of the picture here. We're going to be building a really cool dashboard as our last exercise, but we're building different scenarios and talking about them. All right, so we're going to click in D3, our next blank area. Okay, and we're going to click on Insert and Pivot Table. And of course, we want to make sure our range is selected. Now, my range right now is not selected. You see that there? So the way that you get your range selected is you click on your tabular data tab and you select your range. Simple, right? Everyone got that?
Selecting the whole thing.
Yep. Well,
Okay.
when I say the whole thing, only the data and the
Only
headers.
the data, not and the header. So it's A1 to F15.
That's correct. You're not selecting the entire sheet.
right. Just the
Right,
data.
just the data, right? So the headers and the values. So verify that it's correct, and it should put like we call them dancing ants. It's kind of silly. I used to teach Excel back in the 90s, and we used to call these dancing ants, and people laughed. And anyway, you could see the dotted box around it.
Right.
The existing worksheet is what we want. So last time we did new worksheet, we're going to do existing worksheet. All right. And since we clicked in a cell before, it's going to say, hey, D3, because you clicked there. Do you want it to go there? Sure. So we're going to say, okay. All right. So now we have a separate distinct pivot table also connected to that data. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is we are going to drag market down to rows. We basically want to see total revenue by market. Okay. So we're going to drag market down to rows. We're going to drag revenue down to values. Okay. And we are going to, let's change the sum of revenue to currency like we did before. Okay. And we're going to click OK. That's kind of interesting. Range. I guess. So what do you think? Is this informative?
Yep, very good.
It's tiny. I don't know. I don't know. I'm thinking that maybe we need some additional things here. What do you think?
Great Lakes, yeah.
I mean, there's
Uh,
just two things there, right?
Or numbers,
Pardon?
stores, or models, or regions.
Actually, what we're missing is month. We're missing month. So let's click in that pivot table. Again, make sure you get the right one, the second one we just built. And let's drag month down under market. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm looking for, right? That right there is more informative. Wouldn't you agree?
Mhm.
Yep,
All right. So now we have the total for each region, right? Or each market, I should say. Keep the terminology proper. And we've got the total revenue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my row label, my rows label to market. And I'm going to change the sum of revenue to total revenue. To me, the other one was okay, but it was just, the aggregates, right? It wasn't that informative. Now, here's what's kind of cool. If I click on the little plus signs next to the market, I can collapse. So I can actually collapse it down if I don't want to see all of the granular month data, and I can expand it. So this makes it more flexible, right? I think this does better.
Yeah.
Now, do you notice any unusual trends here?
We're aggregating, we're making different categories. So the first time we did month, regardless of store or region or whatever, then we said, okay, now let's do the month, but let's divide it into the regions.
Right.
And then
So now we have
and
a
then we're going to
market.
get more and more detailed.
Right. Now we have a market perspective. So whereas before we had just total revenue per month, now we have a market perspective. So, and the reason we would do a market perspective is kind of what we talked about earlier. Maybe your client wants to know which markets are doing better than others. Now we can clearly see that New England is doing a lot better than Great Lakes, right? We can see, and it's consistent. So this is representing the data that we saw earlier, right? That we kind of, now let me ask you a quick question. When you stare at this data, the tabular data set, you don't get that picture, do you?
No.
Right? And yeah, I mean, I can see a pattern here, like a lump right here, right? And that kind of says, okay, we got a lump in New England. Oh, and it seems to be attributable to this, right? Because this is the pattern. But and I can see that it's consistent from month to month. So we have a large chunk here, right, that I could eyeball and subset. We have a small chunk here, right? Now, again, this is a very small data set, so this makes it relatively easy. So we have really three distinct groups, right? Everyone can kind of see that,
Mhm.
right? But this tells us a better story. And if you were showing it to your client, this they could grasp, whereas the other, they're not going to be able to grasp, right? They're going to struggle. Right?
Just a bunch of numbers, the other one.
Exactly. It's just a bunch of numbers. And that's why they're hiring you to make some semblance of it.
Mhm.
Because they don't know how to do pivot tables or Tableau or anything like that. They need answers so they can make business decisions, right? All right, let's do another one. So we're going to click in G3 and we're going to go up and click on insert. We're going to click on pivot table. And again, we're going to select our range of data like we did before. We're going to use our existing worksheet. Just make sure that it says sales revenue G3, and we're going to click OK. So now we get a third one going here. So it would be nice to see revenue by model. All right. So I'm going to drag model down into the rows area. And I'm going to drag revenue down into the values area. Now this is kind of a simple one. It's not.
When I click on it, it
You
goes
click
there
on what?
automatically. When I clicked on revenues and model, when I clicked on model, it automatically went into the rows. I didn't
Okay.
have to drag it.
Okay. Good for you.
Is that the way it's supposed to work?
Well, it can. If you double click
Okay.
on something, right, it sometimes will go where, it
Where
thinks
you
you
want
want.
it. Oh,
But
okay.
it's unusual though, Jer. Usually you have to drag them down. So
Okay.
who knows? You
Right,
got
you know.
lucky.
Yeah.
You got lucky. So now we're going
Well,
to form,
confused me, actually. It's,
you might have, who knows, you might have double clicked and dragged just a
no,
hair.
it's happened every time, and I'm saying drag what? It's showing up where I want it, or where you're,
Which is unusual,
Okay.
unusual. So for example, if I got rid of them, right, and I simply clicked on month,
right?
right, it may jump to where it thinks you want it to go,
Mhm.
but it's not always the case. So yeah, it's one of those things. Whatever you do, just make sure that it is stacking them the way you want.
Well,
That
I have
it's,
a fairly new version. I just bought it, maybe 2 months ago.
yeah, I would say it's not the version. I mean, 2016/365 is pretty intuitive.
Right.
And what it may be doing is based on the recommendation aspect. It might assume,
Mhm.
but you definitely
Okay.
don't want the computer assuming too much.
No,
Because at some point the computer might say, I want it this way. And you might say, no, I don't think so. It's going to go another way. So yeah, just always double check.
show
So
values as currency again.
yes, we're going to change this to currency again. Yep. All right. So again, we're clicking on the little arrow next to sum of revenue. We're choosing number format. We're going to go with currency. Easy peasy, not an issue. All right. We're going to change our row labels to model and our sum of revenue to total revenue. Whoops, total revenue. Okay. So easy peasy. So now we've got three of them, three distinct pivot tables, right? So each one has their own properties. Each one has their own, they're all tied to the same data, but it is a different instance of that data. All right. So that's something that's really important. If any of the data changed, you would need to refresh each one of these, right? You'd have to refresh each one, which is kind of a pain. But that's one of the negative aspects of
But
the
you
pivot
can't
table.
refresh the whole sheet. You have to refresh
Right.
table by table.
Yeah, because you're not refreshing the sheet, you're refreshing the object, which is the distinct object. I'm going to say pivot table A, B, and C, but
Right.
you understand what I mean? Yeah. All right. So that's one of the quote unquote downsides. But here's the thing. It would be unusual that the data would be changing. One scenario I can think of where the data would be changing is let's say you realize that there was an error in a specific value and you're able to replace it, right? That might be a situation. There might be, I don't know, typos. And so let's say there's a typo. And so what it does is instead of having 2 markets, it created 3 because of the typo. Remember, it's looking at each as a factor, remember, like R, right? As a label, as a categorical. So let's say there's a typo in either Great Lakes or New England. For every unique, distinct grouping, it's going to create a unique group for it. So that would be a reason to change it. And then of course you'd have to update your pivot table so that you would only have, the 2 regions, if you will, 2 markets. All right. So far so good. Everyone's on the same page.
Yep.
All right. Awesome. All right. So we've added our third one and we did our revenue model, our total revenue by model. So now let's say we wanted to add a chart because charts are cool. And we have to add 2 types of charts because why not? So I'm going to click in cell J3. And what I'm going to do, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, I'm going to select the headers for this little pivot table here. And actually, that's what I meant to click on, but not the grand total or the aggregate total. I'm just going to grab the model, total revenue, and the data. All right. So you can actually make a chart from a pivot table, which is kind of cool. I'm going to click on insert. Okay, and you're familiar with charts, I hope. So the chart style we're going to go for first is a bar chart, which is this guy right here. All right, and I'm going to choose the first one. It's just a classic 2D column chart, nothing fancy. All right, boom. And for the label, let's call it total revenue by model or per model. I like by model. So let's do total revenue by model. Voila. So it's a simple chart, not very fancy. It does what it needs to do. right? I can move it around. This chart, by the way, is linked to this pivot table. All right. Makes sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So we're not going to get into formatting the chart. That's other things. I mean, obviously you could gloss this up and make it better and look nicer. We are now going to add another chart. So I would be remiss if I didn't add a chart that Jerry loves.
Oh, going to the pie charts. Okay.
See, Jerry knows, he knows. All right. Now I'm going to show you a trick. I'm sorry, I just had to do that, Jerry.
You're
We're going
forgiven.
to, right? We're going to go back to our tabular data tab or sheet tab. All right. And we're going to highlight the store column. And we're going to highlight by holding down control, the revenue column
With the header.
with the header. You got it, with the header. All right. It's one of those unique tricks, right? We're going to go up and click on insert and recommended pivot tables. And we've kind of seen this before, but the one that we want is sum of revenue by store. All right. Notice it perceived this the discontinuous or you know non-contiguous selection, if you will. So we're going to click OK.
Question.
Yes.
Did you hit control on both when you
Yes.
select store?
Yes,
So you hit control button, then drag store down, or did you do?
I did this. I highlighted store, then I pressed control, then I highlighted revenue.
Okay, hold on a second. Why doesn't mine do that? Like the first one doesn't have like the gray. Like I did store, and then
Right,
when I
and
go
you
to
press
revenue,
and hold. Press and hold. Okay, then you press. Okay, highlight store, right, and you press and hold control. And highlight
store, press
and
and hold control, then okay, I got it. All right, got
okay.
it.
Yep. And so what it's going to do when you create your pivot table, it's going to put it on a third sheet. All right. Does everyone see that there?
No, not yet.
I'm sorry. What did you do? You went.
Let me delete my sheet tab and start over. Okay. So I highlighted store, everything in store,
Okay,
including
I'm
the
there.
header. Yep. And I'm holding and pressing control, and I'm highlighting the revenue, right?
Yeah.
And then I went up to insert recommended. Yeah, recommended
Okay,
pivot
that's where I
tables.
went
Yep.
wrong.
And the one that we
Sure.
want is we want sum of revenue. Whoops, sum of revenue by model,
Okay.
by store.
Because I went to recommended charts. That's something totally different.
Yeah. Sorry, sum of revenue by store.
by store.
Sum of revenue
Yes.
by store. Okay.
Yep. So when you click OK, it's going to give you a new sheet.
Right.
And we don't want that. So that's something that we don't want. So what we are going to do is we actually are going to grab this pivot table. Okay. And we're going to copy and paste it to our lovely sheet that we've been working on. All right. And I'm just putting it down here in these columns, A and B.
18, A18.
Okay. Now, since we've done that, we have our pivot table here. I'm going to change the header for sum of revenue, make that total revenue. Whoops, total revenue. Don't grow your nails, whatever you do. All right, total revenue. And then, excuse me, for the row labels, since this is our store, right? We're going to call this store. Because that one we didn't have before. It's nice to have it. All right. Everyone good?
So far.
So far, so good. All right, awesome. So now that we have this one, let's highlight the store and total revenue headers and the data, not the grand totals though. All right. And we could actually build a nice pie chart for Jerry because he likes pie charts, but we're kind of running out of room, right? So let me quickly show you how you would do a pie chart. And what we're then going to do is expand this pivot table by adding in some special fields. So let's create, we're going to click on insert. We're going to go over to the pie chart, and we're just going to go with a 2D pie, nothing fancy. All right. And there we have it, 2D pie. Now, does this represent the data as we saw it earlier?
No.
It doesn't.
No?
Well, there was a store that had a monster share. I'm kind of seeing a Pac-Man thing going on here.
Yeah. And a
Right?
store with a very small amount.
We got Sliver Slice, right? The small store.
Right.
And we could always compare it by looking at our data, right?
Mhm.
Well, actually, it does compare to the model pivot table.
Okay, so it is right. So this is kind of a reflection. It's a different type of view, right? But this by model is something separate, right? So model is going to be a product of sorts, whereas this is the store, right? So it just so happens that we have the same somewhat pattern going on,
Mhm.
but they do represent distinct things.
Right.
So it,
Interesting.
right, it's kind of interesting, but that's kind of an observation, right? So if we did total revenue, we changed the chart title here, total revenue by store.
How did
Okay.
you get the? How did you make it a pie chart?
So when I did insert, I had this selected, right? And I did insert. I just clicked on the pie here, and I just did a fancy schmancy, the first one, the 2D pie. The very first
Got it.
one. Yep, just as an example, right? So we're seeing two different patterns here that are very similar. We've got a monster chunk here, monster chunk here. We've got a smaller slice, which is the gray, which could be something like this. And then we have a sliver slice here, and then we have a sliver slice here. So looking at this, there appears to be a pattern of small, medium, and large, if you will. And whether it's model or store, there may be something there, right? So that might warrant further investigation. Now, we don't need our sheet 3 or sheet 2, whichever the extra sheet is that we brought in. So we can delete it by right-clicking on it and pressing delete. Okay. Everyone good there?
Mhm.
All right, so we've got several charts. We've got several things going on here. What I want to do is I want to show you how to add a calculated field. Now, one of the things to think about is we're almost out of room here. We do have a little bit of white space here, right? We have a lot of white space over here, but you don't want to have it so that's so long, so wide that you have to scroll side to side. So
Should we be saving this file?
yes, Jerry, my goodness gracious, sir. I dare say, yes, Control S, please. We wouldn't want you to lose it. We would definitely not want you to lose it. That would
Mhm.
not be good, right? That would not be good. All right. So what we're going to do, when you're building these types of dashboards, again, this is kind of a conglomeration of a bunch of different pivot tables that are pointing to the same data set. Mind you, the tabular data, not a big data set. Each pivot table has a distinct purpose, right? One is based on just month, the temporal plane and revenue, right? One is market, the month and the total revenue. So that has a specific purpose. So here we have the same grand total, right? Between this table and this table, however, and this table, but we have 3 different perspectives. You see that there? So the first thing that jumps out at me is we did not fix our total revenue by store by making this currency, right? So we need to fix that. It's just wrong, right? It's just wrong. So we want to show our field list, and let's fix that first. Got to be consistent, right? Got to be consistent. All right, so let's make that currency, and voila. So that looks better. Okay. So we have 4 different perspectives here. Same data, same perspective. Now I'm going to throw something at you. What if one of the grand totals was off? what would be your first instinct? What would you want to look at if one of the grand totals was off?
What was missing?
Well, what is missing? And what do you think it might be indicative of? Since each pivot table is its own object, and each one of them we had to select data, is it possible we didn't select all the data?
It would have
Let's
to
say
be.
you did one of these numbers, right?
Yeah.
Or that's a little obvious. But let's say you did everything but the last one,
Yeah.
and we're off by 300, right?
Mm.
That would be, because if you're in a hurry, you know, and you're not paying attention, that does happen sometimes. The other thing that happens is if you have a large data set and you go to select what you thought was all the data and you miss something, right? That could also happen. So you always want to check for validity, you know, across the board, that everything looks reasonable. You know, these two, kind of like an accountant, right? These two add up to this, you know, they're all the same. Okay. Very important, especially when you go to expand on a particular table, pivot table for the purposes of calculation. Okay. All right. Everyone good to go?
Mhm.
Yes. All right. Let me move this out of the way because I want to share this with you. And it's all right. Come on now. Work with me. All right. Come on, Zoom, work with me. It's made this thingy really big here. So let me move this out of the way. Let's see here. Hide floating meeting. Thank you. I don't need you to see the meeting controls. We need to see the menu bar. All right. So what we want to do is click in this particular pivot table, the one that's store and total revenue. Okay. Now, the second thing we're going to do is I have some additional menus that you don't have. So Q tools, don't worry that you don't have that. Just ignore it. It's just a special add-in that I have. We're going to click on the Analyze, the Pivot Table Analyze tab. Everyone should have that
That's in
in the
pivot
menu.
table analyze. Got it. Yeah.
Awesome. So again, the only way you get that is if you're clicking in your pivot table. So always make sure you click in your pivot table first and then pivot table analyze. The older versions of Excel, it's just analyze, if I remember correctly. So they added it to kind of qualify, oh, it's the pivot table. All right. We're going to click on fields, items, and sets and calculated field. Okay. So the name of the field is going to be commissions. All right, that's going to be the name of our field. Now, as you can probably imagine, the name can't have spaces in it. Who knew, right? We know these things, right? We know these things. So in the formula area, we're going to keep the equals. We're going to get rid of the 0. Okay. Because the 0 really is just kind of a placeholder. I don't know why they do that, but it's a placeholder. We're going to double click on revenue. All right.
Mhm.
Everyone got it so far? And we're going to then put in the asterisk for multiply and 0.10. So the whole idea is commissions is going to be revenue times 0.10 or 10%.
Commissions, right?
You got it. You got it. All right. So we're going to click on add. All right. So you see it down here in our field list.
Mhm.
And now we're going to add another one. We're going to call this one net profit. Now remember, no spaces, so net profit. Okay. All right. And again, down here, we have our prior formula. We're just going to get rid of that, back it out. All right. So net profit is going to be a function of, what do you think?
Revenue.
Revenue, right? And revenue and what else?
Revenue minus commissions.
Right.
Revenue minus commissions. Thank you, sir. Excellent. So we're going to double click on revenue and put a minus sign and commissions.
Well,
All right.
but then you have to also the cost of goods sold, which we don't know.
We don't have COGS here.
Yeah.
Yep. So again, it's always based on contextually, what does
Yeah.
your data have?
What do we have? Okay.
You got it. So then you want to click the add button and that adds that second field. So we have 2 calculated fields here.
Right.
All right. And then we're going to click OK. Hoo-ah,
we
look
throw
at
in
this.
taxes and throw in the sales tax rate.
What's that?
I mean, we could throw in taxes too if we wanted
There's
to.
a whole host of things you could throw in. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. So great point. So here's the thing. And I think you raise a good point, Jerry. So first thing you would say, well, what's in our data and what do we know about the client? Right. And they may say, well, we want to see, taxes and maybe some things broken out.
Mhm.
It would be based on what the client wants.
Right.
And what the data can provide too. Right. So what the
So
client
yeah,
tells
I'm
us
seeing how
is
you can do a really thorough analysis if you have
absolutely.
all the information.
What the client tells you is somewhat ad hoc data, information rather.
Mhm.
What the data provides is what you have access to. So both of those create the picture.
How do you
So,
move a pivot table?
okay. So the way you move a pivot table is you highlight it like I have here. And what you do, Andrew, is you move your mouse to the border and you'll see 4 black arrows and you
Right.
just click and drag carefully. You don't want to plop it on top of another pivot table. They tend to fight. They don't like each other.
The question,
Yes.
which may be a pain in the butt question, but what if your sales tax varied store to store? You'd have a
Well,
problem.
if it varies store to store, since you only have a few stores, you could create a separate for each one. What I would actually recommend you do is perhaps consider adding it here.
Mhm.
So in other words, since the variation is similar to what we're seeing here, maybe add a tax table here, right?
Right.
That would be one way of handling it. So what we're going to do is we're going to change sum of commissions to commissions paid. Excuse me, commissions paid. Good Lord, come on now, get the S there. Come on. Oh. Okay, and then for sum of net profit, we're just going to put net margin. Right. And again, it's a function of, as Andrew said, taking the commission, subtracting it from revenue. This is an expense, right? And yeah. All right. Okay, so we have built somewhat of a simple dashboard using a very small data set. We've added some insight for our client. But the one thing that we have going on here is we've got the grid, behind the scenes here. We've got all these boxes. So what I like to do at the end is I like to click on view and turn off the grid lines. That's something you can do to add some wow, right? Some wow factor, if you will, to jazz it up a little bit. Another thing you can do is you can highlight a pivot table like I have here, and you can actually format the cells by clicking on format cells. Okay. And you can opt for a border. Let's say you wanted an outline for your border and you wanted, let's say, a thick, black outline. You could do that. It's not that thick, but it looks decent. At least it defines things. So let's do that for each one. Oops, border, outline. I'm going to go with the same one here. It just adds a little bit of, oops, wrong one, Cindy, format. It defines them, if you will. Okay. And then, of course, this one here.
Mhm.
Okay. Pretty decent. So what do you think? Is this informative?
Yep. Could be.
Right? You've got the ability to filter, right? Don't forget, like down here by store, I could actually filter this pie chart similar to what we did earlier by, maybe focusing on just one store, or 2 stores, right? We can kind of do a comparison. If you just have one store, watch what happens. Gee, not very informative, right? Yeah, right. So, of course, it's going to be the whole pie. What can I say? So it's limited, but it works. Okay. You can also filter within any one of these, as I showed you earlier. So each of these drop down arrows lets you make some changes here or there. Simple, easy peasy. So we're going to go ahead and save this. And this is our first example of a pivot table scenario. Okay. Easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not
And,
difficult.
yeah, once you go through it like this, yeah.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
definitely.
So let me ask you a question. I'm glad you mentioned that, Jack. So have you ever created pivot tables before like this?
Yes.
And would you say that there's more pros than cons, or would you say that there's good and bad?
I kind of just learned it and did it on the fly, and
Okay.
just whatever, until, just not really thinking so much about the step by step, but just until I got the numbers, what I wanted to display.
Okay.
To be honest with you, I never did charts before, not in Excel.
Awesome. Okay. Well, so here's the thing, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So how do you think these charts compare to what we did in Python and in R? Similar, right?
Yeah.
Right. In aesthetic, not very different, right?
I'm sure that it's going to be interesting to see which is more efficient, doing it in Excel or doing it in Python or R.
Okay. So let's quickly talk about that. So it took us about, we'll say an hour, maybe in 15 minutes, because we spent the first 15 minutes chatting before we actually got into this. So it took us, maybe about we'll say an hour to build this, right? How long do you think it would take for you to do these types of aggregations in R or Python?
Writing code?
Mhm.
A month.
A month. Sure.
I mean, like
The way I write code, yeah.
if you're talking about well, let's say in your case, I would say it would probably take you maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah, it typically takes less time in like R or Python. However, what you want to be thinking about is if these style reports are very common, there are ways to automate it and use functions to generate things, right? So let's think about it logically. Every business has a month that they generate revenue and a total revenue for the month. Would you agree? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a common scenario. So you could write a function that does that. You would just need to point to the correct columns for that data, right? Same thing with market. Now, not all businesses have a unique market or a specific market, right? So this may not be a common use case for all businesses, but there may be something similar, right? So you have to think about, if I'm doing these tasks repetitively, how can I make it better? How can I automate it? And look at common use cases and maybe, variations of said use case where you dovetail off and you do an exception, right, for the use case. Every business that sells something has a model or an equivalent, right? This could be a category of product. So even if you're a restaurant, right, you might have side dishes, regular meals. When you think of model and how that gets broken down, if you were to look at any specific business and their revenue, right, it would break down by some categorical item or one or more items, right? So that being said, you have to be able to handle categorical data. And that's literally what this is doing. Whether it's categorical with the month, categorical with the model, categorical with the market, categorical with the store.
I mean,
Yeah.
it seems a lot easier to handle categorical data than with either R or Python.
Well, so here's the thing, Jer. I would disagree with you.
Okay.
It's just knowing how, right? So here's the thing. We didn't have to write any code. So this might seem easier. But in Python, in R, it would be very easy just to plug in a new data set, kind of like you did, going from week to week, where you said, okay, now the homework is going to be a different data set, same code.
Right.
Right? Different data set, same code. So
the code
think of
always
it.
had to change a little bit.
You had to change it a little bit. That's because you have a torturous teacher.
Okay.
Right? No, it is the case that you may have to change the code. It's not always a one-to-one.
And we didn't have to analyze the data here or do any cleaning. Which I
We d-
suppose we would have to do if we didn't see the whole.
Well,
data
here's
set.
the thing, and I'm glad you mentioned that. We got lucky because I gave you a very simple
Right, yeah.
data set that behaved itself. There was no holes in the data,
Right,
right? The next exercise we're going to do is a larger data set. And I will tell you that there is no data cleaning that has to be done because that's not the purpose of this class. However, I need to explain that this is a data analysis exercise. So anytime you're doing, the goal is to derive insights and visualization. Remember the crisp DM document that I shared way
Mhm.
back in the day?
okay, one,
Data visualization is one of the pillars, right? And it assumes a clean data set. So if it's
Right.
not clean, you're cleaning the data and you're
right,
looking for outliers, another very important thing. So in this particular class, I will be giving you data that's already cleaned because you already know how to clean data, even Unicode, because you've been there, you've done that. So this assumes clean data. If you did not have clean data, obviously you would want that. And the second piece is you may actually do exploratory data analysis prior to this. This is just a way of visualizing your data. Just like in Python and R, we visualize data, right? So this is just another way to look at data. Tableau is another way, right? Same data, different visualization tool. That being said, your client may prefer that you use Excel because maybe that's what their staff is familiar with. So you're forced into that box. I actually worked with an insurance client recently and they were Tableau shop. They said, if you even say the Excel word, we'll be mad at you. And they weren't that nice about it. And I said, no, not a problem. Right? Not a problem. You always say not a problem. So they were a Tableau shop and they have clients and they support clients and their ability to build their own dashboards. So, it was very clear that no one was supposed to be using Excel. So while the secretaries weren't expected to do Excel, all of the salespeople helping the clients out in the field were expected to do Tableau. So a lot of the work I did was training them on how to do Tableau. So it really depends on the context of the environment, whether it's your employer, your client, what have you. So it benefits you to know all the different ways of doing it. Okay. Really, really important. All right. So we're going to save this because it's a good thing. We should. And why don't we, before we go into the next exercise, why don't we take a quick break? Does anyone have questions before we take a quick break? Anything that jumps off the page?
I'm assuming that anytime every time I saw that we updated the pivot table, the charts refresh automatically.
Okay, so if you update the pivot table, tell me about the update. So what do you mean by update the pivot table? Do you mean?
Well, I'm sorry, if you update the tabular data, then it updates the pivot, because the pivot table is pointing toward the tabular data. The pivot table is picking up from the tabular data, and the chart is picking up from the pivot table. So I'm assuming it's a chain reaction.
So here's the thing, and that's actually a great point, Jack. So if the data changes in the tabular data set, right? Let's say there's a value that you fix, right? So for example, I'm just going to make a change here in February for New England. I'm going to make it 15,000 just to skew things a bit, right? So New England does not automatically change. So any of this data is off now, right? I have to update each one of these, and you see the new data value. Notice that these all updated
charts
when
are updating too.
Yeah, and the charts update. So you always want to verify that, yes, in fact, it did update. Now, did this guy update here?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Aha. So just because these guys did doesn't mean this guy did. You see how that happened? Very
Right.
inconsistent. So whatever you do, verify. Just make sure everything looks, copacetic across the board. All right. Really, and that's one of the bad aspects of the pivot table. It does not update automatically. Okay. So that's you'll hear about that. It's a negative. It just, people get very frustrated. It's like, seriously. And there's macros you can write and code behind that you can write, and you just click a button and everything updates. But that's outside of the scope of the class. But there are ways of handling it to make it, let's say you have a bunch of them and you're like, oh my God, I don't have time to update all of them. Right. So here, I'm going to just change this back. Whoops, I'm going to jump back here. This was 350 if I remember. Yeah. So see, it didn't update. So I'm going to update this one again, refresh. Oh, everybody did, but this guy's, he's a bad guy here. But you'll notice these have calculations and such. There could be a reason why. So I'm just going to update it. Boop, there you go. All right. Questions? That was a great question though, Jack. Yeah, never assume. Always verify. Okay. All right. Any other questions before we take a break? And just make sure you save this file, and we are going to be
What next?
we're going to be taking a break.
No, but what's the next file?
Well,
Yeah,
we will do that when we get there, Jer.
I just want to take a quick look at it.
Supermarket products.
Okay.
Supermarket products. All right. So let's see here. I closed my toolbar for well, this is interesting. How do I get it back? This is terrible. Let's see here. Oh, this is strange. So I've never had to close my toolbar for sharing here. So let's see. Come back to me. Oh, that is very strange. How the heck do I get my toolbar? This is terrible. Julia, help me. What is going on here? This is very
Which
strange.
toolbar?
Help
What's
me
that?
with what?
The toolbar for Zoom, I turned it off and I don't see a way to get it back.
Alt tab, see what's open.
Well, but I know it's open. Zoom is open. Everything's open,
No,
but
I'm just saying, if you alt tab, you should be able to highlight the, no?
no, because it's not in a
Oh,
separate
okay,
window.
gotcha.
Yeah, it's not in a separate window. This is very strange.
And
Did
just,
you hide it near the taskbar?
No, what I did is I just told it to hide. I used the Zoom. Zoom has an option to hide the toolbar, and I'm not seeing a way to get the toolbar back. Isn't that funny?
no, Zoom.
It's Zoom. Yeah, there's literally nothing in the interface here. You guys can see my interface, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sharing. I'm actually stuck sharing.
Stop sharing. Can
I
you?
can't. There's
What if you hit escape?
there it is. Jack.
Okay,
Dude.
good.
Awesome
To
sauce.
get out of full screen, yeah, okay.
Hey. All right. We're gonna
Make me a
take.
co-host. Make me a
Yes,
co-host.
yes, ma'am. I wasn't sure you were going to show. And so yes, I will do that right now. Yeah. All right. So I will pause recording again. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Da-da-da. All right. So data set wise, let me move you guys out of the way here. What do you think about this data set? Is it
It-
Needs to be
Better
cleaned
or
up a little
worse?
bit.
better or worse, right? Better or worse?
More realistic,
Why would you say it's realistic? I'm curious.
because there's more there. I mean,
Okay.
it's not just a couple of rows and columns where we have
Right.
to, we can just look at it.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I'm seeing already that you'd have to clean it up.
Okay, so let's talk about what things would need to be cleaned up. Just, just looking. What types of things do you see would need to be touched up, cleaned up, modified before we made a data visualization out of it? What do
Well,
you
the first thing I would do is just put a filter in just so I could see what values are there
think? Okay,
without
that's a
having
good
to
point.
scroll.
That's a really good point. So one way of looking at your data and drilling through it is to put on a filter. So let's go ahead and do that. So if you don't understand what's at the bottom of your table, your data table, that, and what's in the middle, that's going to be an issue. So when you turn on your filter, again, you're going to go to the data tab, go to filter. One thing that's kind of cool is I can see that there are actually 4 years represented. So that's good to know. When I break it down by year, I should expect to see 4 years, right? So that's a good thing. If there was an anomaly in the year, like let's say an extra digit or something like that, this would pick that up. So we would know right away that there's issues, okay? So that's a good point. How about type? Let's see, we've got 3 different types. Everyone see that?
Yep, what's a hypermarket?
You know what? That's a very good question. So I'm going to make an inference that a hypermarket is something non-traditional. And I honestly would have to look that up, Jared.
Trader Joe's, something like that.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm thinking along the lines of,
Google it first.
yeah, and I'm thinking something that is outside of the core. So like Trader Joe's would be a supermarket, in my opinion. Convenience
It's a
store.
big box store.
So yeah, so like a Costco or Sam's Club, maybe.
Yeah, that's as soon as I punched in hypermarket for Google search, that's the
Yep.
first thing that came up.
Boom. All right. So we all have been edified. I did not know that was called a hypermarket, but as we,
Superstores, okay.
right. So yeah, the superstores, which are traditionally, high volume, they buy in volume. You know how that works.
Sam's Club.
Sam's Club, right, exactly. So that's a good thing to know, but we see that there's 3 different flavors here, which is good. It's kind of good that they did not meld those in with like the supermarket, right? So the fact that they have the 3 distinctions is very important. Product group, we have, a nice variety of products, but nothing looks unusual here. I don't see any errors or anything like that. So notice we're kind of doing data cleaning, but more of an exploratory, right? In the event there is data cleaning, we should see weird things, right? So producer, now there's a lot more producers. Going through the list, if we have an expectation of, what the producer list should be, again, you'd get that from your client. We have a representation of what's represented here. And so, for example, lichen or leakin, they have Lavazza, so it's very respectable. But we have, leakin bread and lichen bread, lichen bread and lichen are split out. I would ask the client, was that purposeful? Is there a reason for that? To see if those should be combined. That would be something I would look at. Own label, that seems a little unusual. Maybe it's a house brand of sorts. If there's any questions at this point, you could ask those questions, or they may have given you a master list, right? So here's our master list. And if this is congruent with the master list, then everything's good. With the
The lichen
understanding,
looks like it's coffee just off the top of the list.
well, and so it's special and right. So lichen and so bread would, so it appears it's a split. It's
Right.
right. So that's a logical split. Good eye, Jer. So we know that coffee is not bread and bread is not coffee, at least on the planet that I live on. I don't drink bread, but I do drink coffee. Imagine. So that's a logical split. So that makes perfect sense. So it's probably a small type of provider or producer and it's specialty, right? Makes perfect sense. So you go through there, you'd go through code. Now code is interesting in that there's a lot of them, right? And it's a unique product code. So it is, one of those things where
Looks like, almost looks like a date, but no.
it
it's
almost
not.
looks like
No,
a
it's
date.
not.
It's not. That's correct. So the way it's formatted is kind of strange. They have pipes on either end and they've
Mhm.
got forward slashes in the middle. And, we have to be cognizant that depending on where this data came from, any given organization is free to make their product codes what they want. As long as it's consistent and representative, then we wouldn't question it. We'd leave it alone. They may have their reasons for preference, you might look at the pipes and say, oh, I don't like them. They're hideous. Why are they there? But they may be purposeful in some regard. So again, if you're building a dashboard for a client, they need to be able to recognize what it is that you're building. And that's really what drives this, not our preference, right? Now, there is a couple of interesting things. We have a little letter A next to some of the codes, right? So you'll notice that,
Mhm.
and what's kind of interesting is that does not show up in the filter, right? See that there? Do you guys have A's?
Yep.
Little A's? So that's a kind of an anomaly. I would probably ask the client about that because it's in a category, coffee, right? And lichen, and all of a sudden we've got these A's here. What does that mean? So if it's a real number and it's supposed to have an A, then great. But that might be, because it looks like an artifact, you might want to ask. Volume, you can kind of see the continuum of volume here. Again, if there's anything that jumps out at you, you would want to ask the client to find out, is there anything unusual that we need to know about? Cost per unit. So you see anything unusual there?
Yeah, I mean, more than 2 decimal places. And
Okay.
then, in the situation like with the code that has the A, you can also just do find and click find
Mhm.
and punch that one value in and see how many times it occurs in the
That's
data set.
correct. Right, exactly. And here's the thing, that's one way to get, a total amount of, we'll call them unusual suspects, right? So that's a great thing, Jack. And also, if you have a master list that has been provided to you, you'd look it up on the list and say, oh, this is a real one. It's just unusual. So we're going to let it go, right? So here we've got, some weird decimal anomalies here, right? And same thing with price per unit. Okay. So notice that in the drop down, it rounded it, right? You can kind of see that there for some of them, or actually, no, those floated to the bottom, right? So that's something we definitely want to factor in. We'll do that in a second. And why don't we look at revenue and see if we see anything unusual here?
It's not formatted.
It's not
to say the
formatted.
least.
That's correct. It is not formatted. So at this point, what we would want to do is, first thing is double check with the client that the anomalies or what we are perceiving as artifacts are normal or not incorrect, right? And then the second thing would be, do we need to change the decimal values in the places and what have you? All right. Now, this is a case where
It's interesting. I just did a quick check on multiplying, let's see, row 4, the
Mhm.
volume times the price per unit, and they came up with exactly the same answer for
Yep.
revenue. So
Right.
that checks out.
Well, so here's the thing, and thank you, Jerry. You beat me to the punch, sir.
Okay.
So yeah. So here's the thing. In this case, the high decimal precision is not a non-issue. It's because at the end it all adds up and it's not an issue. So we won't be formatting these for decimals. Okay, we're going to leave them go. The other thing to think about is everything appears to be general, right? Like these numbers are not numbers. And of course the categoricals, the dates are not dates. You see that there? Everything seems to be general. So what we're going to attempt is the best practice rule of, do we have to format everything as dates and numbers with a specific number, whether it's currency and all that? Do we have to do that to the raw data, or can we do cleanup at the next level? Okay. I will say this to you, because I know for a fact that everything is a number and there's no alpha characters in the numeric fields, we're okay. It will perceive it as a number and we're fine. If there was an anomaly or something unusual, an artifact, there would be confusion because it would not be able to work with 2 flavors of data type in the same column. So that's where, if you experience errors in your attempt to create your pivot table, that's usually what the problem is. It's usually a mixing of type. So it can't add the letter A to the price, for example, right? That's just not going to work. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to select all of our data. Now we've got a lot of data here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select what I can kind of see here. I'm not going to get crazy over the fact that I didn't get all of my data. That's not a problem. I'm going to go up and click on Insert Pivot Table like we've been doing. And before I click OK, I'm going to make sure that the number of rows, columns and rows are represented here. So it goes from A to I, and the value that we're looking for is, do you remember
19 or what's it?
15119, right?
Okay.
Does that look familiar, Jerry?
Yep.
Was it 15119
I
or?
think that's.
Yep,
I'd go back and check.
you're correct. Don't do it. It is true. All right. So
Okay.
I always look first to see what's at the basement, and then, and I also look to see if there's anything at the end, at the bottom. Sometimes people put like X's or O's or Z's at the end, like we don't want that. So I happen to know that this is a valid.
Okay. And we're going to do a new worksheet.
You got it. A new worksheet. Yes. All right. So now
Add
we've
this
got a lot.
add this data to the data model? No.
No, we're not adding, right. We're not adding to the data model. We're just going to add a new worksheet. And again, it's so that we can build a new worksheet with all
Right.
the properties. Now, what I will share with you is we are building an intermediate pivot table that then we will use for the purposes of building slicers. All right. And slicers are going to allow us to manipulate our data in a neater way. Okay. So what we want to do first is we've got a bunch of fields here that we, a lot more than we had prior. We're going to drag type down to rows. And by the way, the goal is to determine the amount of volume sold in each store by year. So type is going to go down into rows, year is going to go down into columns, and volume is going to go down in our values area. And we want to make sure it says sum of volume.
Volume. Goes down into values area.
So we have year in columns.
Sum of values, year type.
We have type in rows, and we've got sum of volume in our values. Now, our values, we want to have currency. What do you think? What is volume?
Yeah.
Volume is units, not currency.
Units. Thank you. Be very careful. Don't perceive those large values as, oh, it must be currency. No, volume in this case. And if you're not sure, go back to your data, right? Yeah. Volume has not numeric in the monetary sense, right? So, but what we should do, and what would be kind of nice, you can kind of see here that there's a lot of numbers in some cases. It's hard to perceive, right? So we're going to click on our right click on that little arrow that we did before, value field settings, go to number format. And let's see if we can find something that it works for us. So I'm thinking this third one would be good with the comma. Does everyone see that there?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So now we have it broken out, because in some cases there's a lot of numbers and you're not sure, is that millions? Is that this, that, or the other? So now we've got it formatted that way, which is a good thing. So the next thing we're going to do is, and one of the things to remember, which I think it's imperative that you remember this, is that sometimes the data plays tricks on you. So you might look at the year and say, oh, that's instantly the year. Well, context is key. Always go back to your data and say, is it the year? Oh, yes, we have a label, a header that says it's, a year. That was one of the reasons why in the initial opening, I said, make sure you name your headers so that they make sense. So that if you have a question about the data, you can go back and say, oh, yeah, that's the year, right? That's one of the reasons. It might seem like, oh, no, duh, but that's, believe it or not, an important thing. All right. So now this looks kind of nice, but it is lacking in some information. So let's click on our pivot type table, go back to our, excuse me, pivot table fields, and we're going to drag product group under type. So we're going to put it in the rows section, but move it under type. So this actually gives us more information. In that one move, we've changed everything, right?
Cool.
We've changed everything. So now let's interpret what we're seeing here. Because why not, right? Let's interpret what we're seeing here.
So what they're saying is there's no beverages or coffee or stuff like that sold in supermarkets when we look at it.
Well,
That's the first thing I see, that the convenience stores has a lot of products, and hypermarkets and supermarkets don't have many product types.
Okay, so that's one thing. And so you might say to yourself, well, what do we know about the context behind this data, right? This may be a particular, remember, let's go back and look. This is actually producers of product, and maybe they choose not to put their stuff in supermarkets. It's not what we're saying is, we're not saying that supermarkets don't carry these things. We don't have any producers that put their product in those areas. See? Right. So and that changes everything, right? So you have to, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Jerry, because at first, when you look at it, you might be saying, well, what the heck is this? It's context. These happen to be a group of producers that choose to put their products in certain types of stores for specific reasons. So it's obviously a subgroup of the total. It's a sample from the population, but
So
not
it's,
the
it's
entire.
not an analysis of a supermarket, it's an analysis of a distributor.
In essence, yes, right. And all of these producers. So think of it this way. Let's say you have a group of producers that are part of a coalition in a regional area, right? And they choose to put their product in certain stores. They pick the type of store and so on and so forth. And let's say your goal is to support that group of producers. Maybe it's an organic conglomerate and everything is organic or vegan or I don't know, whatever, right? So it's a small subset, but as long as it is representative of the context of what you're working with, you're fine, right? It's unusual, right? So if you look at supermarkets, there's not a lot of representation there, and you might be wondering, why is that? It makes no sense, right? So again, context is everything. Context is everything. Okay, so now that we have that, what are some other observations we could make here?
It's selling mostly to more products to convenience stores and mostly
Okay.
to convenience stores.
Okay, all right. That seems reasonable. What else?
Let's say year over year, the volume of sales or the volume of units has pretty much stayed stable.
Excellent. Okay, and year over year is super important. Okay, so
There's
let's.
been some variations in there. They're
Right,
not all
but it's not
stable.
like there's like what's the proper term? There's no outliers.
Well, you
Right.
look at beverages. Look at beverages, 2011, 39,000, 2014, 22.9.
Right.
That's
No,
pretty.
no, I understand that, but I'm saying like if you look at like 2011 is 4.4, 2012 is 4.7 million.
Year over year, you have
4.95.
growth here. There's growth.
Okay.
There's growth here. If you look
Year
at
over year, total, you have growth. Not
Right,
at not at the individual product level.
that's correct. But overall, within each, what we can say is within each, and we have to get the right terminology. So within each type, right, year over year, there is growth for each. If we look at each one, the level of growth is different for each one, but the year over year is an increase for all of the different types.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's something that we could observe and mention. All right.
There
So
are outliers.
pardon?
There are outliers pointing to what Jerry's saying. Like if you dig a little
Okay.
deeper, most of them progress year after year.
Mhm.
On an individual basis, some of them have decreases.
Right, but when you say some of them, you're talking at the product level.
Individual
Yes,
product.
at the product level,
Right,
at the individual product level, there are outliers.
That's right. So there are different patterns at that product level, right?
I want
And-
to work for these guys. They sell a lot of coffee.
Absolutely. What can I say? I have a side business. I didn't tell you. Oh gosh. All right. So we have type and product group. We have sum of volume, right? And now sum of volumes, let's think about this logically. What is something that's missing? We don't have revenue here. And before we said that, volume is not revenue. So let's bring revenue down, but let's place it on top of our sum of volumes. Okay. Now we have a whole different picture, don't we? Boom. Just instantly. Every time we add something, we get something different, right?
Revenue on top of summer value. Okay.
Yep. So, and if you're not sure what is what here, we've got year end values, right? We've got type and product group, sum of revenue, and sum of volume.
Now I
Okay.
have a chart that's too confusing for me.
Okay, and here's the thing. There's ways of getting around that, but keep in mind, this is an intermediary chart.
Okay.
We're actually going to be using this for other things. All right.
Mhm.
That's a good thing, right? Jerry says that's a good thing. Right. So now one of the things we might want to do is some of the formats of the numbers, excuse me, some of the formats of the numbers, for example, revenue, we would like to be currency because we got a lot of number action going on here. So let's right or single click on the sum of revenue in our pivot field tables or to pivot table field, excuse me, and let's make that currency. Because I don't know about you, but I need to see, you know, I need differentiation, right?
Absolutely.
How
Yeah.
many decimal places we're going?
Here's the thing with that, Jerry, let's take it down to no decimal places because with
Okay.
currency, I'm sorry, but a couple pennies here or there, don't
Doesn't
need
make
it.
any
So,
difference, right?
exactly. So thank you. I forgot to do that. So let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, I just did it on the wrong column though.
It happens. So you can fix it. Right, Jer?
Right.
I'm
Volume,
just curious.
volume.
And I mean, for the sake of not looking it up right now, through your experience, when you shift it to no decimal places, does it round up or down, or does it just leave it? It's just like if it's like $600.51, does it say six? Do they do 651 or?
It does not automatically round, I believe. And you can test that by increasing it and then taking the decimals out. Inherently, it does not round up or down by default, or at least it didn't used to. Usually if you wanted it to round, you had to go equals round and, you know.
Right. I'm
right?
just curious if you knew offhand.
Yeah, no, and I apologize, Jack. With this new version, I don't know, but
That's cool.
we could flip it. But that's actually a great question.
So
now-
you click on one sum of revenue and it did all the revenue columns.
Yes, because
cool.
they were aggregations of revenue, whereas the other was aggregations of volume, right?
Yeah, but you didn't have to highlight every column independently.
No,
Just
no.
any revenue column would have done it.
Boom, that's right. Isn't
There you
that
go.
cool?
Mhm.
Isn't that cool? That's a time saver. Now, that being said, let me jump back and let's click on the arrow next to sum of revenue again. Go to value field settings. Okay. You know, there are other things you could do. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you change your color of your font or anything like that. So at this point, the options you have in here are not very, you know, there's not a lot of things going on here that give you options, right? So for me, I still have a lot of number action going on, and there's nothing here that gives me the ability to make changes at this point. Okay, but there is something that we can do. So if you, again, we're going to use our handy dandy control key. So we're going to highlight all of the data in a revenue column, hold down control and highlight each of the revenue columns. And don't do what I just did. Don't get the headers. Just get the data. Whoops. And I can't talk and chew gum at the same time. Here we go. Here we go. All right. So you want to just hold down control, get each of the revenue. Whoop, and here. Right? Everyone got that there?
Yeah.
All right. So now I'm going to click on the little paint pail and you can make it whatever color you like. I'm going to go with a pale blue just because that's the color of our sheet here. And that kind of separates them. All right. That makes it easier to see, hopefully.
Mhm. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. All right. So we've got a pivot table and, you know, we could change these labels and things like that. But for time constraints here, you know, well, let's go ahead and do it because it is kind of ugly. I can't stand it. So for sum of revenue, let's just quickly make this sales. Let's make volume volumes. All right. Look at your pivot table fields, guys. What do you see? It updates. Isn't that awesome? It's in the
Yeah.
rest of them. All right. And
Click in the
so,
right box, maybe.
well, you got to click in the right box. Yes. So it
Right.
does a lot of cleanup for you. We actually have time to fix it. So because it does a lot for us. Okay.
And it's volume, we're going to call. Can't read what you-
Volumes.
Volumes,
Yeah, because we already have a volume. So you can't use the same name.
right?
So we added an S. Yep.
Okay.
All right. And the only other thing I would do to clean this up is row labels. Maybe call it type, right? And column labels, I would call this year. You know, if we really wanted to be fussy, and let's save while we're at it because we've done quite a bit of work. Now, like any pivot table, we could filter by year. So if I wanted to click on this drop down next to the year, I can specify, let's say just 2 years, you know, 2011 to 2012, right? Easy peasy, right? And then let's say I wanted to filter by the type of store. Let's say I only want to see hypermarkets. I can drill down even further, right? So now I have 2011, 2012 for hypermarkets, and now I can compare year on year, right? I can look at both sales and volume for all of this. So what is this filtering? What insight do you get here? Make it a little bigger.
Yeah, please.
Is it better, Jerry? You want me to go further? There, how's that?
It's a little better. I didn't catch how we got there. I was fixing some of my typos.
Okay, so for a year, we excuse me, for a year,
Okay.
we made it just 2011, 2012.
Right.
And for our type, we made it just the hypermarkets.
Okay, so we click on those arrows to
Yep.
drill down.
And that allows you to filter. So
Right.
how would you interpret this? Just take a minute and take a look at it and tell me, how would you report these findings to your client based on what we have here?
You mean try to summarize everything you see?
Yeah, so what
I would
trends,
say
what
The
patterns?
total, I would say the year, a comparison. I would say a breakdown of 2011, 2012, as well as the total sales and volumes of those 2 years for hypermarkets for these 3 products.
Right, but you realize what you just said has not given the client any valuable information, because they're going to say, well, what were the trends, right? So how about year on year? What would you tell them about year on year? What do you see with respect to sales and volume?
Year on year, volume was pretty steady, but the sales went down. Volume went up a little bit, but sales went down total.
Okay. Wow. Okay, that's a good one. So what else do you see?
Well, do you want to drill down on the products or?
What do you think? What else do you observe?
125. Sauces did well, and giant cheese products went down, and
Which is
bread
kind of
products were pretty
unusual.
level.
Well, and cheese products going down is kind of unusual, right? Or I'm
Well,
assuming.
one would wonder if they had a fight with one of their suppliers and lost a product line.
Or what else could it, maybe it's indicative of preference. You know, people are
Mhm.
eating healthier, but then there's bread, right?
Yeah, see, when you initially asked that question, I thought you wanted a summarization as opposed to an interpretation.
Ah, and great. So Jack, here's the thing, right? And I really didn't specify, but since we're doing the exercise is about insight, I figured you'd go there. But here's a good point. You never want to assume, right? You want to give both. And what I would do is I would lead in with how you started and then say, so based on that, here are the numbers. And I would then go into the year on year and what have you, right? But you would never want to leave the client hanging with, you know, okay, so what story does it tell me, right? Am I doing well in the hypermarket arena or not? You know,
So based on
The
10
way
years
I would
ago,
do it is I would provide them with the overview to say, this is what you're looking at. And then go into detail based on what Jerry said, say, based on this information. And then you say what the individual products, how they performed in each year.
Right. So would you start high level and then go into more
Yes.
granular? Yes, exactly. So they're thinking aggregates, they're thinking year on year, right? That's a high level metric. They're thinking sales and volume relative to each other, right? And then those combinations year on year, And then they eventually drill down into the individual products and those trends, which are more granular, right? So that being said, what would you say about the products? We already talked about the cheese. What else would you say about the products? Do you find it unusual that bread is doing better than cheese and sauces? You know,
No,
because cheese, the sales is better, but the volume is less. Why would that be? I know why.
cheese costs more.
Uh-huh. There you go. Boom. So cheese costs more than that, but what about sauces? What kind of sauces are they selling? And what do we know about hypermarkets?
Everything's in bulk.
Everything's in bulk. You nailed it. Nailed it. So contextually, this makes perfect sense. They would expect to do less volume on things that are in bulk. Because we're looking at hypermarkets, this makes perfect sense. So it's really no less revenue. The fact that we sold less volume is really not an issue because of the bulk aspect of
So
it.
volume then means number of sales and not number of units sold.
Well, what do you think? Does it, which is it? And how can you determine that? If you go back to your product list, does that help?
Well, you have to do a little bit of math.
Well, they've got it
But,
kind of here, right?
yeah,
They've got
I mean,
volume,
they
they've cost per.
Yeah, you'd have to go back and look at the cost per.
Okay, so here we've got our volume, our cost per unit, price per unit, which is what we sold it for, our retail, and then our revenue, right? So based on that, what do you think volume is?
Per unit.
Bingo, because we've got a cost per unit. So
Right.
again, if you're not sure, go back to the data table and look,
Mhm.
right? Now, contextually, is your insight any different? Is the
Well, to be
story
honest with
any?
you, going back to the tabular view,
Yeah,
cost per unit would be the wholesale price, I'm assuming. Price per unit is the sales price.
Yeah.
well, so
So I would,
cost per
yeah.
unit may not be the wholesale price, Jack.
well, it's the price that they paid for it. No.
That's correct. Yes, it's the price that they paid for, but we don't know if it's wholesale or not. It's just
Okay.
basic, right? It's what, right? And we don't know if there's any volume discounts or anything like that. This is basically, you know, discounts will be handled differently, but right now we know that there is a per unit cost of, you know, like 602 for the first one. Right?
Yeah, I'm just saying though, they obviously would know what cost per unit is, but I had to take a second look and realize, okay, cost per unit is what they bought for it before they resold it to the
Again,
customer base.
this would have to be average cost per unit over the course of an entire year because it's going to go up and down during a year.
Not necessarily. It's based on the nature of their agreement with their supplier.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that
But-
cost
but-
per unit, and you raise a good point. That cost per unit may be an average because it's at the year level
right.
or not. And so you raise a very good
We'd have
point.
to ask you.
Ask, you got it, right? Because, you know, think of it this way. This is a snapshot, but it's a year snapshot. It's 2 years worth of data. So we have to assume that either they did some kind of averaging or their cost is static over time, you know, from year to year, right? We would have to see, is there any difference in cost per unit from year to year if we were doing a cost analysis, which we are
Right.
not, right? But those are great questions. In knowing that ahead of time, you know, when they hand you a data set like this, it behooves you. You've only got so many columns. There's not that many to ask those simple questions. You know, is this cost per unit? Is this per year? Is it quarterly? Does it change and how? And I mean, at this point, that cost per unit would not change relative to the year for meat for the licensed producer.
Well,
So it may,
I'm looking at convenient coffee,
Mhm.
cost per unit, and it's going up and down. It's at 72 cents, 56 cents,
Different product code.
$1.19.
Different
Yeah.
product code.
Yeah,
So, you know, espresso might cost one thing, right?
but if you
Um,
lump it all together as coffee,
Yeah. What I would submit though, that when you see those changes, it's relative to the code and what we know about the code. And
so
some might be
if
more
we go look at
luxurious.
if we go look at sauce, how many different sauces do they have? They have
Probably quite a bit. Did you feel, let's filter by sauce. That's a great point here. Let's quickly filter by sauce and let's see.
product and click off select all and sauces. What is it?
A lot of different sauces.
Right.
A lot of different
Thing I
sauces.
took is I did a find all, and it
Uh-huh.
takes you year by year, and I did the very first one on the list.
Yep.
Which is meat from Leakin, and it's $602 per unit, cost per unit.
Uh-huh.
And then when you go down to 2012, it's $6.20. It went up 18 cents. And then in 2014, it went to $6.58 for the cost per unit.
Yep.
And then it went back down to $6.06.
Ah, so now let me,
Sorry, that's for 2013.
yeah,
And that's for the convenience store.
right, right. So the cost over time does change.
Yep.
Right? Now, let me ask a question. Is it for the same product code?
Well, it was for, yes, it was for the same product code. Because
So-
I did a search by product code.
Okay, all right. So, and so that would be the second question, within that grouping, is there something distinct about it, right? So yeah, that would be, and you could do a cost analysis, drilling through the data that way. All right. So again, the important thing is all these things tend to change how we do this. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a new pivot table. We have one here that's great, but we're going to create another pivot table. And the reason we're doing that is we want to build something called slicers. So I'm just going to click in a blank cell, not in my current pivot table. I don't want to confuse things. And I'm going to click on Insert and Pivot Table. And the range that we want is that monstrous range that we have. And as you know, you can just select part of your data. You don't have to select all of it. And does anyone remember the number? It's 11519, yes?
Yep.
All right.
15119.
Woohoo, yes. We are going to do a new worksheet. Okay, new worksheet. And we're going to click on OK. All right. Everyone good so far?
Okay, yeah, never mind.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you were going to rename sheet one.
Actually, no, not yet. And I'll tell you why. I usually do that at the end. If you're not sure what's what, sometimes that helps during the process. But for this exercise, we're just going to leave them as is for now.
Got it.
Yep. So no worries. We're going to drag year down to columns. And we're going to bring revenue down to values.
Oh, I made a mistake. Okay.
And product group down to rows. What happened,
So I have
Jer?
to- I didn't include the column headers in my drag.
Mm.
So I'm just gonna trash this sheet.
Yeah, just trash the sheet and start over. That's the best way when that happens. And it does happen. So,
Okay, so it's insert,
yep, a pivot table.
table,
Yep, and make sure you
grab
have,
the range. Okay, so I'm gonna go here to there. A to I, and it's 11519,
11519. Yeah,
and it's new worksheet.
you got it. Yep, new worksheet. All right. And so what
Okay.
we did, Jerry, is
Now
we
I got
had-
it right. Okay.
Yep, you have year down in columns, product group in rows, and excuse me, revenue in values.
It's sum of year?
Yep,
No,
so,
it's
not
year-
sum of
no,
year.
Year,
It's in
okay.
columns.
Oh, it went automatically went to values. Okay.
Yeah, because it tends to do that for you.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So yeah, there's an example where you don't want that.
That's
No, I got
interesting.
year in columns.
But what was that,
What-
Jack?
What else
And
we-
your 2013 shows up with blank spaces while mine's complete.
Ah, I wonder why that is. I wonder why that is. How could I figure that out, Jack? What do you think? I probably did a bad. I did a bad, I bet you. I did a bad. Jerry, you have complete numbers too?
No, I don't. I haven't finished everything. We're doing year and what else? Product group.
Year is going into columns.
Product
Product group
group
is
goes-
going into rows and revenue is going into values.
Revenue is going into values.
Yeah.
Where's revenue? Down there. Okay, that's sum of revenue.
All right. So Jerry, do you have complete,
No,
Value-
2013, I have holes.
you have holes. Jack doesn't have holes. So Jerry, that means you and I did it wrong. So I'm gonna blow away my sheet. You can blow away your sheet. Let's do it right. Because Jack's gonna get very mad at us and Andrew's gonna say, what is wrong with these people?
No, I'm being patient.
Okay.
I
so-
actually did that on purpose, believe it or not. Just so that you realize that when there are holes, there's a problem. Houston, there's a problem. And I actually know what I did. I miskeyed it. I like to do the 10 key method. I should just stay away from it. So I'm going to go back and Jerry,
Pivot-
you and I are going to
Insert pivot table.
insert pivot table. And
Table
we want to
range.
make sure we want to make sure that the value is 15119. And see, I already typed a 6 because I'm doing 15119.
5.
Ah, okay, so you went beyond that.
I went beyond, and that's usually when you see holes and you know that tabular should not have holes, you've cleaned your data. If you see holes, that means you went beyond or you did a bad. Okay. So I knew right away I did a bad. So I'm going to do new worksheet.
Yeah, and I had 115, not 151.
We did the same thing. Jer, oh my
okay.
gosh. That's all right. Okay. So for
So
year is going to go
goes
down to
into
columns.
Columns.
All right. And revenue is going to go down to
Values.
values.
And
And
rows
what
is
else?
product
Product group, rows.
Rows, okay.
Hooah. Everyone see the difference?
Yeah,
Yep.
I got a full
Okay,
column.
excellent. Good eye, Jack. Good eye. So again, the point is if you see holes in your data, question it because you looked at it earlier. There were no nulls. We expect not to have nulls because if we do, it's going to cause problems with our analysis and our insight, but also it's not going to be accurate. All right, so we have a little pivot table. It's kind of cute. We're going to click somewhere in the pivot table because we are going to insert a slicer. Okay, we're going to
Make a
go.
currency first.
We should do that, Jerry. You know what? Thank you. Let's go ahead and do that for revenue. My
Okay.
bad. So we're going to change that to currency and we are going to get rid of decimals. All right. Now, really quick, while we're on the topic of decimals, there's always this goal to get rid of the last 2 digits. Can you think of any case, and excuse me for coughing in your ear, I don't mean to do that, but can you think of any case where decimals should stay? Let me grab some tea. I apologize. Can you think of any time where the decimal or that precision would be important? I can
If
think
the
of like
customer
stock
requests it?
market.
I was gonna say if the number one, if the customer requests it, but also,
Yeah.
In high
Um,
volume situations.
yeah,
Okay.
if they need to be able to calculate based on that level of granularity. But
Right,
for tax
so-
reasons, it usually is calculated in whole numbers.
Right, exactly. So financial, like stock market, right? And you're looking at the price per, share that you want some high high precision, right? If you're looking at things like accounting specific information that is not for financial reporting in the annual sense, right? Then you would want to have context is going to drive that, right? Preference and or context. And so knowing what the client prefers is important. There may be also scenarios where that having that sense value is very important to them for a specific reason. And maybe it's because of costing that is, that small price differential may determine whether or not they buy from X supplier or Y supplier. And you might think, oh, it's negligible. It's 25 cents for God's sakes, right?
If they're
But for
high volume.
them, yes,
volume.
exactly. So that is very meaningful to them. So context really drives that. Look at ice cream, guys. What's happening here? Coffee and ice cream. A marriage made in heaven. Right? Coffee and ice cream. I'm sorry, that's something that just jumped out at me. I am a child. I am a child.
And
Okay.
alcohol and salads.
Oh no. Those are the 4 food groups. Okay, folks. We've figured it out. We've answered the world's question: alcohol, coffee, fresh salads, and ice cream. Okay. And all of them are vegan. So why not? Or can be vegan. Anyway. All right. So what we're going to do now, we're going to do slicers. The reason you use slicers right now, we have the ability to filter in our table here, right? But I don't know how you feel about this, but going in here, having to deselect, then click alcohol or whatever we want. Is it visually appealing? Not really. Does your client want to have to do this? No. Going into this, and they can't even find the drop down menu, and right. So it's not very friendly as a dashboard to them. So what I'm going to do is show you how to do slicers, which make it a lot easier. You want to click somewhere in your pivot table. All right. Excuse me. I have this frog that won't go away. I so apologize. You want to click on insert and slicer. Okay. Everyone have the insert slicers window pop up?
Where's slicer? There it is.
Yep. It's all the way towards the
On
right.
Right. Yep.
Yep. All right. So we are going to select year and product group. We've decided that that's the filter options we want to try. We're going to click OK. Now, when you get your slicer, you want to just drag them so they're side by side. Aesthetically, you don't want them laying on top of one another. We're going to make the one for the year a little smaller. So if you click on the slicer and go from the lower, the bottom and the middle slider here, right? The middle dot here, you can make that smaller. And conversely, we can make this one taller because we've got more groups of product. Okay, so that's a little more aesthetically pleasing, right? Would you agree? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So let's.
How come on my pivot table I'm only seeing cornflakes now? What the hell happened?
Because you probably clicked on cornflakes.
Yes. Okay.
All right. So it's very easy to manipulate your pivot table. So thank you, Jerry. You proved my theory. So when you mouse over, notice when I'm mousing over either the product group or the year, the one that's highlighted when I click, that controls your filter now. Okay.
Cool.
Now let's say I wanted 2 years at once. Do you see this little icon in the year? It says multi-select. It looks like a bunch of check boxes. If you click that, now you have the ability to select more than 1 year.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah. And then of course, to remove the filter, you just click on the red X and that removes the filter. So here I could look at the year 2011, coffee, and there are my values for revenue, right? Pretty cool. A lot of coffee action. Okay. Now I have coffee selected here, but let's say I wanted to add, let's say ice cream. I'm going to click on multi-select and now add in ice cream. And now I can compare two products to each other year over year, right? Now that multi-select is still activated, I can add in other products. So I might say, well, let's look at bread products, shall we? And compare that. And we can see there's a big difference between the sales of bread and coffee and ice cream. We can bring in alcohol and see that, okay, we have a trend here. Apparently, bread is not one of the food groups. So let's turn that one off. And then of course, salads, right? We kind of peeked beforehand. This is the 4 food groups we were talking about earlier, right? Now, mind you, this is just for which year? Now here I activated 3 years. If I wanted just 2011, I would turn off these other years, you see? So it toggles on and off. So what are your thoughts? Is the slicer easier than the other? Yes, no, maybe?
Must confess, I never knew it existed.
There's so many people,
Easier
Jack,
than the other what?
then filtering it this way and coming in here and saying,
Yeah, it's
right,
great.
because you can do multiple select here, but it's like, oh, I gotta find it. The
Right.
GUI, it's not pleasing to do. This a client can handle, right?
Right.
Now,
Mhm.
here's the thing. There's a lot of folks, Jack, that don't know that slicers exist. It's just one of those things. It's such a cool option for people. So basically, one of the things to think about is when you're planning to create a dashboard for your client, you want to think about, what's the best way to mock this up for them? They are wanting to drill down through the data. They're wanting to make insights. Okay. Now, the other question that you could ask is, do we place the slicers on the same worksheet as the pivot table? All right. Or could we move them to a separate sheet? Now, I do have, the other sheet here that I worked with. I have the product list, which we definitely wouldn't put it there. But we could relocate these to their own sheet. Okay. So for example, if I add a new sheet tab, and let's say I call this dashboard, watch what happens. I'm going to go back to sheet 3. I'm going to select by pressing Control click and selecting both my slicers. I'm going to cut them and put them on the dashboard. Now, is this good or bad? Is this a good GUI choice or a bad GUI choice? What do you think?
Depending on the amount of space you have, but I think it's a bad one.
It's a bad one. I'll tell you why. Because I don't have any data here. So let's say I picked this year. Yippee! I can't see anything, right?
So the slicer has to be with the data.
It has to be with the data. Notice this sheet updated, but it's like now I've got to click on another sheet tab. Well, that's no fun, right? So you have to know, you have to pick your battles. That's the point. You have to pick your battles. It's beneficial to have your dashboard have the data on it. All right. So at this point, I could move this, or I could just move the slicers back. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to move my slicers over. I'm actually since I renamed it dashboard, I'm going to move my slicers over, and I'm going to bring my my pivot table back, and I'm just going to cut it and paste it. And then of course, reformat, make the columns wider. So knowing ahead of time is really important. Okay. Knowing what you want the end product to look like is very important. Knowing what your client's preferences are is very important. Okay. Since this is all of the data that I have in my pivot table, I don't have to worry about the left to right problem. I can actually butt these up against one another with no issue. Okay. So there's another thing that we can do that makes this more aesthetically pleasing. And that's, when we select an item, like let's say 2012, right? We do have it obvious that it is selected because it's blue and the others are white. All right. But let's say it's not the client's colors. Let's say that's not, their flavor, if you will. We can right click on the pivot table and go down to the slicer settings and make changes to things like the title. Let's say they don't like the title. Maybe they want it to say select a year, which seems kind of picayune, but let's say that's what they want. You put that in there, right? Select a year. And actually I did the wrong one. I'm sorry, my bad. We want it down here in the caption. I did the actual name, which is a no. So select a year. And maybe that they say that that's, more conducive for the folks that are going to be using the dashboard, right? That's something you can do. Another thing you can do is you can modify, the borders as we did prior. There's several different things to do. So the point is that you want to check with your client, find out what they prefer, and have that in mind when you're designing this, when you're mocking this up. All right.
Sorry, did you copy or did you move from sheet 1 to dashboard, everything?
I copied, but you could have used move.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's just another way of doing it. That's a great point, Jack. You can move it or you can copy it. I just selected it and copied and pasted.
Or, would it also, I would have also did it. Yeah, I would have just done I copied the pivot table and each thing manually, or could you just do a move or
you could do a move or copy sheet
of the whole worksheet?
You could do that, but you could do it either way.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. I did it, a different way, but you could have done it that way with no problem. And then once you've done that, I deleted the blank sheet. You would want to delete the blank sheet then. Okay. All right, so we've done several different types of pivot tables. We did slicers. And so here's what I'm going to encourage you to do for homework, because you guys love homework, right? You have a file and it's called Hydrate Drinks. All right, it's a case study. And I'll give you some context. And while we're here, let's go ahead and save this and let's just open up the file and look at it. Okay. So let me open it up. Hydrate Drinks. Right. And it looks like this. Does everyone have this here?
Yes.
This is going to be your homework. So this is a representation of an ERP extraction. So everyone knows what ERP stands for? Maybe, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Have you heard of SAS or Oracle? An
Yeah.
enterprise resource planning
Ah,
system.
okay, yeah. right.
Ah, so you know those systems, right?
I
There's a
was
lot of
thinking
different.
Wyatt.
There you go. There you go. So this is a data extraction from that system. So it is flat. So we have to assume that it came from a transactional system and then was flattened. So it may come from a data warehouse. Data warehouse is going to have the data flattened, right? Meaning that there's no relationships in the data. All right. We have 88,453 rows, and we have some artifacts down here. Look at this action. Remember, I was telling you before that sometimes there's little artifacts at the end when that you extract data from like SAP or Oracle, what
Right.
have you. Sometimes they either purposely put those in or artifacts happen. So you want to make sure that there's no artifacts past the last row of your data. And if there is, you want to delete them. So I gave you a little hint for homework. You'd want to delete this. Now, if you specify the range that doesn't include it, it's not going to assume it's there. But if you did it using the data table way, it's going to say, oh, we have additional data. Let's bring it in. And we can see it's garbage data. So the best bet would be to just get rid of those
No,
artifacts.
it's not garbage. It's not Unicode.
It's not Unicode, but it's sleepy code. It's Z's and X's. Right? So
Got it.
that's just something to remember. There could be little treasures at the bottom that you want to look for. Okay. So for homework, what you're going to do is, and you can work together with someone else as a group or what have you doing this. What you want to do is you want to understand what the data represents. You want to make sure you want to go through the process of, does the data need cleaning? What is the nature of the data, right? Doing some of the filtering that we did earlier. What would be a good dashboard using pivot tables and slicers that would benefit a client to provide insight? Assume that they gave you this data extraction. They said this came from our ERP system. We can't make heads or tails of it, but we need to. What can you tell us? All right. I'm going to give you a little hint here. We have a date field that does not look like a date field, but it's a date field. This is actually 4-digit year, 2-digit month. All right. 4-digit year, 2-digit month.
16 year, okay.
Okay. So you have to ask yourself,
Period. It says, okay.
it's right. It's called period. You want to ask yourself, and remember it was called mutate.
Mm-hmm.
It's a feature engineering. The purposes of this exercise, and I'm going to give you a hint, you might want to insert 2 columns to represent the month and the year as separate entities. Okay, it's feature engineering, and that's something we've done in R and Python. The same follows for this type of scenario. We've got a tabular, denormalized data set, and feature engineering would be something that would be important to do, especially if you come across something like this. Now, why would we not just change it here and just make it a date? That's month, a 4-digit year and month. Why do you think it would be important to take this data and add 2 columns to represent the month and the year separately?
Why would we or why would we not?
Why would we? Why would that be a good thing? I guess
The
is the point.
seasonality and I mean, their sales are going to change.
That's
over time.
Yep. And the way it's represented here, there's no way that the pivot table would automatically assume that this is a date.
Yeah.
It's just not, it doesn't understand why, comma, MM. Doesn't
So
get that.
we have to do some research on our own to figure out how to do that data cleaning.
Oh, Grasshopper, you've already learned these things. Do you remember our function
Yeah,
called
course
left and
one.
right? Left and right, baby.
Mhm.
Course one.
Okay,
Yes.
course one.
Yes, you have
So
the
the
keys to the
research is to
kingdom.
go back to
Yes, exactly.
where we started. Okay.
Yes, you have functions to do that, right? Remember, and this
Yep.
is one of the reasons you learned that, because you get these extractions from these data warehouses, and sometimes you got to
Okay, so I
manipulate.
remember we created new worksheets to do this. So we
Right.
should not-
And there's two ways of handling that. I will tell you that it's not necessary for you to do an additional worksheet. However, if you wanted to keep the original data pure, you could do that and clone this and then have a
Right.
feature engineered data set. That I'm going to leave that up to you. Okay. So for homework, you're going to come up with a data dashboard from this data. And what we're going to do for maybe the first 15 minutes of the next class is just talk about your experience with it. Okay. We won't take up too much time, but we definitely want to see your dashboards. So that's one of the reasons why I'm recommending that you get together, even on Slack, and do it as a small group. Okay.
Question, can we do calculations this way? Because I was looking at the data and I said, well, let's look at profit margins.
Okay. So here's the thing. Remember, we did calculations in our pivot table. So I would not modify this. I would let the calculations happen in the pivot table.
In the pivot table.
Yes, just like we did. Do you remember which one we did a calculation for? In the tabular
I
data?
remember we did one. I don't remember which one it was.
We did the commissions, right? The net profit.
Commissions, right? yeah.
Yes, yes. So look at that as an example. What I would do is let the pivot table add those calculations. Don't disturb the raw, right? I would
Right.
add those calculations to the pivot table. All right.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
have net sales, cost of goods. Oh, we have a COGS. We have the cost.
We
of
do
goods.
have a COGS.
So we can do it.
Yes.
We can find out
Yes.
net profit. Okay.
So here's the thing, and I'm glad you said that. Just so you know, it's called Hydrate, right? That's the name of the company, right? Hydrate drinks. These are all drinks. So the brand, these are all drinks. Okay. So that's something, that backstory that you have on this, but all of these are named appropriately, right? They're all named appropriately. So that's just something to think about as you're, we have warehousing information, we have distribution information, we have a whole bunch of rich information. So you want to think of,
Pitbull Extra and Pitbull Power. Okay.
yes, yes. So you want to think, you want to look at the data first, and you want to say, okay, given what we have here, what would be the best way to build a dashboard in Excel using pivot tables and perhaps charts and definitely slicers that would be aesthetically helpful for the client to get insights. Okay. And of course, you want to defend why you did what you did and why you believe it's beneficial. And keep in mind, there's no right or wrong answer. Pretend that, the client hasn't said, this is what I want. They've said, I've got this data extraction. I need some insight. Help me. So you have to
Okay.
figure out, you have to balance, you don't want to overwhelm them with too much GUI. You want to make sure that it's easy to navigate, intuitive, all those classic, data visualization principles. And you can even get feedback from each other. Say, well, does this make sense, or is this useless? What are your thoughts? And that's why I'd love for you guys to discuss that between each other and just share some, insights and ideas. Okay.
Sounds good.
I have a question, which
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on before, is when we're looking at, when we set the filter and we look at the different names of the different, I'm looking at the products right now. Where do we see the number of different products?
You would not see it in here. You would
Yeah, where
actually
would we see that?
you would have to, in your pivot table, you could do a count.
Okay.
Yep. So your pivot table can actually expand on that
Pivot
filter.
table would do that. You can't do it with the filter.
Well, I'm not saying you can't do it here, but remember, you're on top of your raw data.
Right.
So the goal would be not to do data analysis in here. It's what data do we have and what do we need to clean, right? Remember, data, when you're doing exploratory data analysis, right? Before you even get to that point, you're doing pre-processing, and you want to say, what do I have here, and what do I need to look for as far as outliers, things that need to be cleaned and what have you. Once you know that this data set's solid, then you can do those counts and sums and all that stuff in your pivot table, because
Right.
those actually might be things that the client would like,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
All right. So any questions? That actually was a great question.
Kroger, Costco,
Jerry's like,
Kmart,
Jerry
Publix,
loves data.
okay.
Jerry loves data, right?
Walmart discounters and Walmart supermarkets. So
Oh,
that's
you're
Sam's
looking,
Clubs,
you're looking at the different
client types.
client types. Yes. Yes. So we actually have big box discounters, grocery, and supermarkets. We have got 4.
Yeah, well, look, I was looking at the client, not the client types, but okay.
Oh, okay. So you were looking at client type. So what do you think?
No, I was looking at clients and then I looked at client type.
You got
Right
it.
there. That would be interesting to look at.
So what kind of business am I?
You're a food distributor or a drink distributor.
There you go. There you go. And I've got
Yeah.
Kroger's, and I've got all the folks, but I specialize in drinks, hydration.
I gotta
Right.
get going. I gotta get my sump pump ready because there's a flood warning.
Okay.
Oh,
Be
yep.
be
Yes, you
safe,
do.
Andrew. Be safe, Andrew. Okay.
We'll
And
see you.
thank you so much. And I sent the invite out for Zoom. So,
Thank
all
you.
right. Thank you so much, Andrew. All right. So any other questions? Anybody? So it's all about the drinks. It's all about the drinks with this one. Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna go back to the earlier videos just to, find, just to make sure I get the formulas and everything else right.
Absolutely. Well, and here's the thing, if you don't practice them, you lose it. And this is, part of this is building on skills that you've acquired early on. We're practicing those skills in different ways throughout, whether it's Python, R, what have you. So we'll be doing calculations in Tableau. We'll be doing visualizations in Tableau, but all along we've been doing sort of a pattern of things. And if you don't use Excel for so long, like Jerry said, I haven't done Python in a while. I don't remember. You have to kind of go back and refresh your brain on those things.
Yeah, but when Jack said left and right, I said, oh yeah, I remember doing that.
See? So muscle memory.
Dr. C said that.
I did.
Oh.
Right.
Well,
But
somebody said left and right.
you know what? It was said, right? And here's the thing, Jerry, you remembered. So
Actually,
that means
I remembered, but where I have my notes on how to do it is something else, and I don't want to go back and watch the video.
so here's the thing.
Well, we have both.
That'll be
I mean,
too
there's a lot of
painful.
good resources.
So here's the thing, right? And since we said left and right, we know that they are functions. So if you wanted to look for it online, look at the right function and the left function for Excel. And you could even in help, you can look for the left and right function. So that was one of the reasons I kind of dropped that hint, because I know that there's different preferences. Some folks don't have time to watch the video, and I get that. So no worries, no worries. So any questions? I hope, was this helpful?
This was,
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
amazing.
Yes. So yes, and Yulia, we actually mentioned that earlier. So that was the very first. You're
All I
talking.
remember was course 1, and it was.
Course 1. So I have to remember what specific class. That's a very good point. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find it. It was so long ago for me as well.
Right. You don't need to do it right now. Maybe just later for other folks in the chat, in the Slack channel.
One of the things that I would like to encourage folks to do, though, is to, when they're not sure, they can't remember, is to search online. Google is a treasure trove, right? That's the other thing.
But they have to know what to search for.
Well, that's why I said right and left. It's right and left function. Yep. Yeah, I didn't want to leave them hanging, but that is the trick. And you've got the left is the year and 4 digits, and the right, which is 2 digits. So, yeah.
Do you plan on? Should we just refer to this recorded video to get the summary of what the homework is, or you don't have anything listed in the course?
I don't have anything. Yeah, I want to leave it open-ended, and the reason I'm doing that is, I'm giving you the file as though the client gave you the file, and what I want you to do is You develop a workflow, you develop a plan.
Got it.
Yep. So that's why I didn't give like a scripted do this thing. Because, you know, that's how it sometimes happens. So,
Understood.
yep.
That's a
So,
trim function that we're looking for?
no, Jer.
No.
No more hints.
Filtering technique, and I have all my notes. I found them. Feature
All right.
scan. Okay, I'll
Yep,
find.
same
They're
here.
in
I
there
got all
somewhere.
my notes.
I love
Stop
it. I love it.
recording. Stop recording then.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.